Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life, episode 292! My name is NBZ, and I return bedraggled but still alive from the Game Developers Conference 2025. Wow, that rhymed somehow. Anyway, hello, I'm here, and I'm joined not by Bally, as usually is the case, because he went over and decided now is a great time to go to Loch Lomond, so off he hopped, decided to go hang out with that Nessie in the lake, even though that's Loch Ness, not Loch Lomond. They should have a Loch Lomond monster, is my opinion. However, we're joined by expert in the field of video games and all things Nintendo as well, friend of the show, Matt Lorigan. Hello, Matt. Welcome.
Hey, good to be back. Really, really nice to be back.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Have you been to Loch Lomond before, Matt?
No, I've been to Loch Eck. And
Loch Eck? I've never heard of Loch Eck.
No one's heard of Loch Eck. There's literally a sign right by Loch Eck that starts the sentence saying, "Poor old Loch Eck, always overlooked."
Oh, no. Yeah, I guess so. The fact that I haven't heard of it speaks to its lack of notoriety. But yeah, it's I think it's actually. So here's a funny story. I believe that where Bally is staying right now is a place that I also stayed with him about maybe 15 years ago. That his parents owned a timeshare there or something like that.
Oh wow!
And I remember we went to the gym, and Bally was like, right, I'm going to take you through my fucking hardcore gym routine. Obviously me, the most unfit motherfucker on the planet, was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I died, basically. Like, I absolutely just, like, got murdered. I remember just, like, my muscles burning, and he just laughed at me, basically. So that's our story of being up at Loch Lomond, which was a good time. But yeah, I think I put that down to why I've never worked out ever again in my life.
Yeah.
It was all Bally's fault, really.
And I never went to the gym again.
No, that was it. It was done for me. Yes. We're here anyway in his stead to talk about Nintendo and video games and other such things. Today's show was going to be regular, I would say, in some senses. We're here on the bubbling pot, Matt, right now. It's the 24th of March as we record this. And I think by my watch, we are T-minus 2 weeks out from the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal. In fact,
closer.
It's next week,
yeah.
Right?
We're 8 to 9 days away.
Yeah. Which is, let me be frank, insane. I think, I don't know, when the start of this year happened and that initial trailer dropped, I was like, 2 months, that's such a long time. And I think it speaks to the busyness of lives as adults that suddenly my fingers snapped and we're here again. We're going to very soon find out what, in fact, Nintendo Switch 2 is and what else Nintendo have been hiding from us.
Switch up,
and we're
surely.
going to be speculating about that on today's show. So we're going to look back at the original Nintendo Switch presentation, have some thoughts on it, and maybe use that to give us some ideas about what they'll potentially do in the next video, what they will announce, and all the things we'll find out. But that will be the second half. The first part of the show, we're going to talk about the video games that we have been playing. So let's get into it. I obviously had a good amount of time on a plane going to San Francisco and back to play some video games, and I decided to bring my Switch because I felt like I've got to kind of clear off some of this backlog stuff before the Switch 2 comes around. I decided to revisit a game that I'd started a while ago called Bayonetta Origins: Cereza and the Lost Demon. And Matt, I think you said you touched this a little bit.
Yeah, I played the demo of it a while back.
Oh, great, okay.
On the Switch eShop, which I've since reliably been told makes a very bad case for the game.
Yes.
So I've been wanting to dive back into that, but I think that is about the first half an hour, 45 minutes of the game.
Okay, yes, yeah. And I should say that, yes, that is very slow. It is, in fact, I guess the way to position this is it is a Bayonetta spin-off game, right? And so obviously the Bayonetta games are known for their high-octane action, kind of character action stuff, big bombastic spectacles, very campy, very just over the top. And this is a very different affair. I mean, tonally, it is essentially treated like a children's storybook where you are playing as a young version of Bayonetta. Obviously, at this point, she's just called Cereza, which is her given name. And she I think at the beginning she's like kicked out of the witch's coven and she gets taken in by this kind of witch of the forest called Morgana, and she's essentially training her to be a witch essentially, and teaching her the ropes and all that sort of stuff. And so you as Bayonetta have like a very limited kind of amount of things you can do. You basically have this ability to freeze things in place, but as a little girl you can't really hit anything, you can't do much, and so what ends up happening is you go into the forest, you get lost, and you meet up with this demon. You summon the demon. The demon, in fact, is playable in Bayonetta 3. The demon comes as part of the tool set for another character, the extra, whose name I cannot remember now, but the extra character you play as in Bayonetta 3, her moveset uses this Cheshire Cat demon, basically. So there is like a narrative through line, as much as anyone can care about the Bayonetta narrative. There is a through line there. But the thing to compare this game to, more so than anything else, I don't know, Matt, if you get into this in the demo, is Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, because you basically control these two characters simultaneously. The left stick is Bayonetta, and you can do her abilities, or Cereza I should say, and her abilities on the triggers on the left-hand side, and then the right stick is the demon, and you control him with the right-hand side, essentially. So in some ways, you could treat this as a co-op game, you know, if you had like a young kid and wanted to play together, where one of you plays as Cereza, one of you plays as a demon. And I know that some people, I think Bally actually played Brothers a second time with Caroline, where they were both playing as each individual character, which I think for that game is a little bit too simple. But for this one, it makes a bit more sense because you are doing combat. So you are dropped into combat scenarios where you are rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time or whatever, because you're trying to like move Cereza around, lock an enemy in place, and then also move the other character and attack with them at the same time, and it can get pretty complex. But yeah, I don't know if the demo goes that far or if it just gets to just like the opening stuff.
Yeah, I honestly, it was so long ago that I played it that I cannot remember. I've got a vague recollection of that, but it also sounds more interesting than I remember it being. So potentially I didn't quite get that far.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because, like you say, very, very slow start before that. But that does sound very, very cool.
Yeah, and so I would almost call this like a Zelda-style game. It's like isometric in perspective.
Yeah.
You are exploring these kind of like mystical forests. There's lots of chests to find. There's like small enemy encounters. And then you enter, I would almost call them like little mini shrines, where they are little areas with some puzzles and then sometimes like a combat arena. And I mean, the Zelda similarity is quite striking, because when you open a chest, like I swear to God, they like lifted one of the sounds from Breath of the Wild out of there, just like the mini chest opening sound, because you know how in the new Zelda games they don't go through the full like they just do the like little jingle for the chest opening, and so the chest opening here, like, it definitely is its own thing, but it sounds so reminiscent of that it's almost bordering on like, is this legal? But it's very charming, and I think it does a very good job with that stuff. You have kind of skill trees for both characters, so Cereza can get like the ability to stun multiple enemies at once, and then your Cheshire Cat can get like more kind of combos that they can use. But it's very plodding, I would say, for the first, let's say, 3 to 4 hours. So it is a little bit of a struggle to get through, and I think that's probably why I stopped previously, because I'd gotten to a point of you get different abilities or different, let's say, elemental things for your cat. And the first one is like a leaf ability, where he can kind of yank shields off of enemies, and he can interact with the environment. There are these little, these kind of like runner bean environmental things, where he like plucks them and they like open slowly and you get a bunch of jewels out of them. So that stuff gets added, but quite late, I would say. So the opening is a little plodding in terms of you're going through and you're kind of going through similar areas and doing similar combat for quite a while. And then you have like a big boss fight with that ability, and it's like, oh, okay, this is suddenly going somewhere a bit more different. You enter a new area, and so from what I played on my plane journey out, I played maybe 4-5 hours in a row, which is a really good chunk, and it felt a lot better. Like, it felt like, okay, we're actually seeing some more interesting locations now, the puzzles are developing a bit more, and it felt like there was a bit more variety in there, which was nice. I do think that it definitely it sticks to a formula, and you know what the game is going to be the whole way through, but it definitely twists it enough in that later part of it to make it a lot more interesting, a lot more engaging. And I just think it's presentationally pretty phenomenal. Like, there are rare instances in this generation of a third-party game that is exclusive to the system, right?
Yeah.
Astral Chain probably being the biggest example. Another game I played on the plane, by the way, which was a very, very good experience. That's a, I think I played that in 2019 when we went to America for Ali T's wedding. And that, like, 60 FPS on handheld is just insane. Like, an incredible looking game. But Astral Chain looks astonishingly good. I know Prince of Persia isn't an exclusive, but it was built for the Switch.
It feels like it could have been, right? It feels like they could have gone first with that, and they're like, just put it high res on everything else. But it has that
100%.
Switch exclusive feel.
Yeah, for sure. And I would put this game up along with those. Like, it runs at 30 frames, but it looks so good. It has such a really distinctive art style, this very painterly, almost pastel-y kind of aesthetic, and the character design is fantastic. The animation is really fantastic. It has a vibe that is kind of carried through the whole thing, and I really like it. It's very, very striking, and that kind of goes in tandem with the fairy tale storybook nature of it, where the game is narrated by, I think, Morgana. So Morgana has a Scottish accent, and then you hear this Scottish accent through the story as you keep going. So my assumption is that she's basically narrating it as you go along. Me and Bally have often talked about we should do an episode ranking Scottish characters in games, and in terms of accent quality and all that sort of stuff. I would put Morgana up there. She's very, very good. I think very accurate in terms of the accent and the kind of the way that phrases are said and things like that. But it does give that, I don't know, something about Scottish accents and fairy tales works together in my mind, right?
Perfect.
I don't know, there's something about it.
No, I completely get that. It's bang on. That maybe an Irish accent does the same as well, but like that Gaelic thing, and it looks the art style is a little bit like Celtic, if that makes sense. Like it feels quite European in that sense, and that feels like the perfect voice for that type of story.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think some of the kind of like demons and kind of those kind of creatures, like they feel reminiscent of like a mythology that could come from those parts of the world. So I think it fits very nicely. There's almost like, I don't know, I feel like with Irish accents especially, people talk about it with like almost sing-songy quality. And I think, the Scottish has a little bit of that too. Like there is a what do you call it? Oratorical, I guess.
I know the word you're trying to say. Yeah.
yeah. Like it feels like of an oral tradition, right?
Yes.
Like there's an oral tradition to that type of storytelling, and it fits that region quite well. I think basically is what I'm trying to get across. So yeah, all that presentation stuff is very good. I do think that, because it is very slow with that presentation stuff, that contributes to the pacing issues, which is, okay, I'm going to walk through the forest. Oh, here's a slow cutscene where we slowly do a little painterly reveal of, something in the environment where a Scottish lady talks to you. And so, those cutscenes can take quite a long time, which means that from a kind of like, pacing perspective, you might feel like, oh gosh, it's taking me quite a long time to get through this area. And I think that probably contributes to it more so than even the level design stuff. So, if you do read quickly and you would like to just get through that stuff, I would recommend it. But the problem is the voice acting is really good. Like the young character who does Cereza, I don't know if it is a kid or not. It sounds like it is a child actor, but it's one of the best performances I've heard from a child actor in any game. Like really, really strong stuff that I think carries it very, very well. So yeah, I think it's a very simple and very easy to understand and not very, kind of complex story, but it's one that I was engaged with, or have been engaged with the whole time. I should say I'm probably a few hours from the end, so I've gotten all the 4 elemental abilities now, so I can turn into water and fire and all that sort of stuff.
Nice.
And have different abilities with my cat. But yeah, up until this point, I've had a great time with it, and it does do things to break it up later, where like, oh, you get separated from Cheshire, and now you're just playing as Cereza, and you have to figure out how to do puzzles with just her, and that sort of thing is neat, and I appreciate like the directions it goes in, and some of the boss fights are really cool in terms of figuring out the puzzle solving. And yeah, I think it's just overall a very, very solid experience that I've really enjoyed. But I do think that the pacing, especially in the early game, doesn't do it any favors, and so I'm not surprised that a lot of people kind of picked it up, maybe bounced off of it, and then didn't go back. But yeah, it's very, very nice, and I think it's a good one to play before Switch 2 comes out if you're looking to kind of clean your backlog up a little bit and have something that you missed out on. Then I would definitely recommend Cereza and the Lost Demon. And I don't think you need to be a Bayonetta fan at all for this. It's such a totally different type of game. It's a different audience they're going for, and yeah, there's some story tie-in, but again, like, I don't know. I'm sure there's some people out there who care about the Bayonetta story. I'm certainly not one of them. But yeah, it's cool. I do. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say they do. I remember when the game was coming out, a lot of the marketing and sort of like PR around it was them talking about trying to find a new audience for Bayonetta, like a younger audience, because it does obviously skew more mature the regular Bayonetta games. And I do wonder whether like the slower pacing as well, like a slower introduction into it, is part of that as well, like allowing like a younger audience. And also, like, it's funny you say about the storybook thing, because that's the exact same issue I had with Plucky Squire as well.
Right, yes.
Which is that, like, we're gonna narrate you this thing that's happening and and it's like, well, yeah, I get that, but I've read the lines and I sort of want to get to the next bit, and I feel bad. I don't like that impatience that I have for that, but I do notice it. Even I daren't say it, but I have that issue with Eastward as well, with the unskippable text on that. Like, so you get that thing where it moves at its own pace, and
right, yeah,
and yeah, I think that's potentially sort of like a similar issue here. One of the reasons I've always wanted to get around to this eventually, though, is it feels like one of the handheld games, if that makes sense. Like,
it does, yes.
In the terms of the Switch not being like a console or a handheld anymore, it feels like back in the day this would have been like the 3DS spin-off to Bayonetta.
100%.
With the isometric view. I mean, you would have been controlling Cereza with the D-pad and the monster with the stylus or something like that. It has that sort of real classic, we're going to make a smaller, lower budget game for Nintendo's handheld, and because they've only got one console now, you just get these two types of releases from same developers. So I get the feeling this is going to be a bit of a Switch gem by the time we're out of the generation.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, just you saying that immediately in my mind, I can see it, right? Like, it also, like, when I'm playing it, I'm like, oh, this could work nicely with 3D, right? Like, it almost has that depth built into it that I think could work very well, especially because, you know, my brain sometimes trying to remember, like, who is who and which side of the screen. Like, if the cat is on the left-hand side of the screen and Cereza's on the right, because they're controlled with the opposite sticks, it's like your brain just takes a while to like, oh no, I need to put them back so that I feel like I'm not crisscrossed this whole time. And I don't know, I'm not sure if 3D would help with that at all, but at least it would like protrude them out a bit more from the screen, so you would have them a bit more kind of like in your head of where they are. But yeah, I very much agree with that. I think this is it's a spin-off in the sense that like it's doing something very different, but I think it feels like it was built with a smaller kind of budget in mind and a smaller kind of... It doesn't have quite the bite-sized gameplay of those handheld iterations, but like I was saying, with the kind of shrine-esque areas, you basically like enter this zone, and the zone turns weird colors, and it's basically like a corrupted part of the forest, and you go through, you navigate this like small area, and you enter this crack, and the crack opens up, and you go into these I can't remember what they call them, but they're basically just like sub-realms where you go through and you run up a staircase and you do a little combat challenge, or maybe you do a little bit of puzzle solving, and then you finish it and you break out, and you heal that part of the forest. Those sections, they maybe take, I don't know, between 7 to 10 minutes, and they feel like, you know, a thing you could pick up, play, and then put down again, right?
Yeah.
And so in that sense, they do feel like they are somewhat designed for handheld play, but yeah, I think it's one of those where it does have other stuff you can do, like there's exploration for like finding other bits and pieces. I will say that one of my frustrations is a lot of the abilities in the skill tree require this second currency. So there's currency you get from defeating enemies, and you get a different one for Cereza and for the demon, but then there's like a second rarer currency that you only get from finding special chests or like doing certain things, and because I've not been doing that much exploration, I haven't really been finding those, which means I have all this currency that I can't spend because most of the abilities require that extra currency as well. So I haven't really upgraded anything for like 3-4 hours because even in just like the main game, they haven't given me any of those, which I find a little bit odd. But you can go and explore stuff if you want. It does have a map which is okay, and you can actually fast travel between save points, so it does give you the ability to go and do all that stuff if you want to. But I think just because of how long it is already and the pacing of it, I felt like it's just more of a go through, get to the end type of experience for me. So hopefully we'll finish that up soon and take it off the list for the Switch One before we move on to the next system. So Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and the Lost Demon, a little bit of a hidden gem on the Switch. Definitely check it out. Lovely. Well, Matt, we have both been playing another game. You have finished it. This is my first time with Donkey Kong 94, as it is colloquially known. It's just called Donkey Kong, though, right? The Game Boy Donkey Kong.
Yeah, which I sort of love that it was just called Donkey Kong, because now it's so well known and well loved, it can't play the trick anymore. But can you imagine buying this game for your Game Boy thinking you were just getting the Donkey Kong arcade game?
Right, and the 4 levels of original Donkey Kong.
And then playing through those 4 levels, which it sort of does, right? It gives you Donkey Kong in this like updated form, and Mario's got a new moveset, but and then it gives you another 8 hours of game after that.
So I'm not very far in. I am I guess I'm about halfway. I finished World 4 today.
Okay.
And I believe there's 9 worlds total.
There is 9 worlds,
from what I've seen. It is. Famously on this show, I've talked about Mario vs. Donkey Kong. My distaste for Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I believe the quote was, "It's like trying to eat steak with a spoon," by which I meant the controls are dog shit. That's my.
How's that the quote that's not gone down in history? How I know. Steak with a spoon, not the controls are dog shit.
Exactly. I'm not a very big fan of. And we played that very early on in the show's life. I think it was like 2014, and it was available through the 3DS Ambassador program, and me and Bally both played through that game. I think Bally even went further and did like the extra stuff at the end or whatever, but like it's quite a lot in that game, and I came out of it not liking it at all. I thought it was cool from a puzzle kind of design perspective, but I just hated playing it so much that I never found the joy with it. And so I've always been skeptical of Donkey Kong 94, because everyone's like, oh man, this was the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and I'm like, well, that game wasn't good, so this must not be good either. And I think the shocking thing for me is playing this game, and it controls 10,000 times better than the GBA game. Like, oh my goodness, this actually feels responsive, and it's a generation behind. Like, I just don't understand how they fucked it up so badly on the GBA when they had even more capabilities and even more stuff they could do, inputs, all that sort of stuff. But with the 2 buttons, with everything here, and with, I'm also surprised, a very Mario Land 2 aesthetic. It feels like they took the Mario Land 2 aesthetic and applied it here for this kind of Donkey Kong experience. I've been having a really good time with it so far, and maybe part of that is also I can save state, I can rewind, so if I get annoyed and miss a jump or whatever, I can just rewind my way back. Matt, having played through it, is this your first time through the game, or are you revisiting it this time?
A little bit of both, in so much that I started playing this, I want to say like 3 years ago, and I played up till World 6, like all in like the space for like a month, and had a really good time with it, and then just dropped off. And I think it was before it came back to Switch Online, so I was playing it on the 3DS through the Virtual Console.
Right, okay, yeah.
And there was no sign of it coming back to Switch Online, and I was like, oh, you know what, I'll pick up my 3DS save file. So I played through the last 3 worlds of the game recently.
Okay, cool.
Which I'm picking it back up halfway through after a while. It took me a little bit of time to get back into the swing of it, because there's quite a few like controls, and like secret controls isn't the right way of putting it, but there's a lot of little techniques that are taught to you along the way, and like things that you could do from the beginning of the game, right? But until the game shows you in like those little cutscenes between worlds and stuff, you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's like I can triple jump, I can backflip, like whatever it is, and so I've gotten back. I went back into it and finally completed it, which was nice to tick off the list. But you are right about how it controls. It is. I'd say it's the most responsive platformer on the original Game Boy. Like, I don't know anything else on the original Game Boy that feels quite as responsive and slick as it. And that includes, like, 2 full fat Mario platformers that I've always felt a little bit weird.
Yeah, I guess I have a lot of nostalgia for Mario Land 2.
Yeah.
So I definitely I like the way that game controls, but I think you're right. I do think that there is a slickness, especially to like the what would you call it? The flip jump, I guess, the one where you go to the left then right, but it's the side jump that you get in 3D Mario games. Yeah, so that feels that just it comes out so easily in this. Like it feels like so smooth to execute, and I always do it when I mean to do it. And yeah, like that is I think the thing that overall speaks to how fluid the game feels, basically.
Yeah, and I can't. It's one of these games where, like, in my head, you'd expect this to be later on in the Game Boy's life because it is so well put together for the original Game Boy that you're like, oh, it might be one of those, like, like Pokemon era games from like 98 or 99 or something. And the fact that it's not, the fact that it's 94, like, it's such an impressive piece of tech. The sprites all look fantastic on the Game Boy. It just feels perfectly built for that console. And
they have a thing about Donkey Kong's arse, which we need to discuss. So like they have limited pixels to work with, and yet they dedicate 6 of those pixels to showing you DK's butt as many times as they possibly can. Like he does this little animation where he goes into the keyhole basically, and every level essentially you have to collect a key and take the key to the door, and you open the door and you follow Donkey Kong through. And each level, Donkey Kong goes through that door, and he can't quite get through it, and he's jiggling his butt to get it through that door. By God, he does, and he gets it through. But I think they get so much character across with such limited animation, which I think is really fantastic.
I think it's really fun as well because this is pre. I don't think it's pre, but it's not Donkey Kong Country Donkey Kong, which all of the later Mario versus DK things are. And I'm a big DKC fan. I love that version of Donkey Kong, but it's really the personality they've given this villainous one for Donkey Kong 94 is way more fun than in all the later like Mario versus DK games. Like in those ones, you've got Mario against hero Donkey Kong, and it doesn't quite work. Whereas this feels like a much like more mischievous Donkey Kong, and the animation really like helps play with that.
Yeah, there's something a bit more animalistic about him, I think, and I think that does speak to the more original design of Donkey Kong and like the threat that he posed and the kind of similarities between King Kong and Donkey Kong. But yeah, you're right. It does feel slightly different, and that characterization is well done. And I think you see a little bit of that through the boss fights that you have. And it's an interesting structure to this game because it basically each world is broken down into kind of 3 chunks, right? And each of those 3 chunks includes 3 levels and a boss fight. So you're essentially doing 3 puzzle levels where you are platforming through a space, and each level also has 3 collectibles to them as well. So you can get those optional collectibles, which will then potentially give you extra lives and things like that. And you are navigating obstacles, you're collecting this key, and then you're crucially taking the key to the door, opening it, and getting to the next level. And then every 4 levels, you get a fight against Donkey Kong. And these are essentially riffs on classic Donkey Kong levels or new ideas or basically new boss levels for the original Donkey Kong, essentially, which I thought was very cool because they have so many different mechanics they add to this, and they basically take those and are like, okay, so what if we looked at the original arcade Donkey Kong and we're like, okay, let's make new levels for this. How would we approach that? And it's very cool. I think they do a good job of utilizing a lot of those classic kind of mechanics that we already had, but introducing fresh and new ones as well. And you can see the DNA, like you can honestly like look at some of the modern, like even March of the Minis Donkey Kong games, and you can see stuff that they were doing back in this game through there, like I think it's very ahead of its time in quite a few ways. But it still feels archaic in like the ways that make sense of, okay, well, I can't jump and attach to a ladder, right?
Yes.
Like I was so, every time I was like, oh, let me get on that ladder, I'll jump and then hit it midair. Nope, you can't do that. You've got to start from the bottom, and you've got to go up to the ladder from bottom to top, which I think is actually an interesting design constraint, right? I think that it works from a level design perspective, and they can make certain things happen by doing that. There's a mechanic where you hit this block, and then, suddenly it goes into this Mario Maker style screen where you can plop the block somewhere, and it will create like a pathway. There's stuff that I hadn't really seen and didn't really realize was in this game that I found quite surprising, which is very cool. And then you have the how much did you end up using the handstand kind of ability here, where Mario basically gets on his hands and anything that drops onto him is rebuffed, essentially. He doesn't get hurt by it.
I was just about to be, I use that all the time, but no, I only really used it for jumping. There are some later bits where you do have to do the handstand thing to rebuff stuff. There's some boss fights later on that play around with that mechanic a lot more. I didn't do it a huge amount just on like a level-to-level basis, I don't think. But again, that's one of those things that we were talking about earlier, right? Like a secret mechanic that you would never know when you first started playing the game, but then at some point a level requires you to use it, and it will show you a little clip of Mario doing that. You're like, oh, okay, that's how that works. But yeah, I'd forgotten about that. But there are some boss fights late in the game where you absolutely have to do it. But I didn't remember using it on like a level basis too much. The Mario Maker thing is really interesting as well, right? Like moving like basically a single pixel around the screen to be like, this is where this platform's going to go, or where this ladder's going to go up, and like combining the two of those as well in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And this in terms of puzzles, like where you're at, when you get to the last like two worlds, some of them get really devious. Like you have to. It starts as a puzzle platformer and it very quickly becomes a reaction puzzle platformer. Like the further you go through, where it teaches you the mechanics of, how to solve the puzzles, but then you have to do it at speed. You need to grab this thing and move to this area and make a platform here and get up to it before it disappears. And I think, have you come away from this being like, this is a better game than Mario vs. Donkey Kong? Because I think that's where I sit with this.
Yeah, I think so far, for sure. I could see, like, if the back half does become frustrating, then it could maybe fall off a bit. But I really despised Mario vs. Donkey Kong, so I don't see there's any world that I like it more than this, And again, I think the crucial part for me is playing on Switch, having that rewind function means that I almost never get frustrated with it because I'm like, I can just undo it. And I think that's part of the nice thing of revisiting these older games now is like, we can meet them on our own terms. And if that means like, okay, I'm going to, have 75 lives because I actually haven't died because I've just been rewinding, so be it. But I think like, hopefully that is a good enough kind of salve for the back half in order to mitigate any like overwhelming frustration for me.
Yeah. To use a TNL term, I think this, compared to Mario vs. DK, I think Donkey Kong 94 has more of that Nintendo juice. More of that, like, sure. Each world is going to give you, like, new things to tackle and new mechanics and new obstacles then to change how you use those mechanics. And there's always something a little bit new. You never hit a point in this game where you're like, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. It's constantly chucking ideas out. And the fact that it gets 9 worlds of ideas out of it, I think is hugely, hugely impressive, and it makes me a little bit sad that Mario vs. DK, the minis in that, right, weren't a huge part, but they were a small part, and it makes me quite sad that that's the route that the series ended up going, because I was never interested in any like the March of the Minis or anything like that sort of Lemming style, and I think if they'd kept going with like really unique puzzle platformers, like if they'd managed to build on Mario vs. DK again with more of this style of thing, like the Donkey Kong 94 style of like new ideas, new platforming, new puzzles. I think that would have been a really nice series to take it through the DS rather than what we ended up with.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely feels like they lost something after this. Like they kind of bottled some magic and then they were like, let's do a different kind of direction. And you're right. Even with the kind of lack of visual variety, just because of the limitation of the Game Boy, like they can't have different colored areas and stuff like that. It's all very much the same. The fact that everything does feel quite distinct. Like I just did the level with the monkey's tails you can attach to, and they're just like waddling along, and and then there's a puzzle where I'm like, how do I get? I have to wait till he's over this thing, move the switch so he falls through, and then I can use his tail to get across these spikes. Like there's that stuff that I think is still appearing and is still engaging me on a level of like, I do have to think about this stuff. And it's really, really smart, and I've not really lost steam with it so far. I think I was surprised by how long it ended up being, because my expectation was like, oh, this is like probably 3 hours long, and I went on how long to beat. It's like, no, 6 hours. I was like, Jesus, okay, this is a lot bigger than I was expecting. And yeah, I got stuck once, and that's where I stopped on the plane, like midway through level 3, and it was just because I didn't realize that I could get to the top of a ladder and go over a thing, but it didn't look like I could, basically. And that's really the only part where I've gotten stuck on this. Everything else feels, from a design language standpoint, very well communicated, and yeah, well thought out. And yeah, they get a lot of mileage out of lots of those things. Like, for example, the the Mario Maker style thing where you're putting blocks down. There was one where you run across this section and all the sand kind of falls underneath you, and you're like, oh, that's gone. What do I do? So you have to basically build yourself 3 mini platforms to jump on, so that when you get to the other side, the sand is still there, so you can carry the key back across, essentially. And yeah, little puzzles like that are just very simple but well executed, and take you a couple of minutes to think through, and then you're like, I got it, I know what to do. It's great. And there's also like this meta game of, okay, I can get the key up there, but I have to throw the key up, then I have to get up there, and I have to get the key back into my hands before it like flashes and disappears again. So there's a bit of kind of like, there's a bit of Mario 2 to it in that way, of like, getting the key and like, dropping the key so the fucking moss doesn't chase you anymore. But it's the opposite in this case, of like dropping it, but you have to get back to it quickly, so that it doesn't disappear, essentially. So yeah, very, very cool. I definitely will keep going with this and finish it up. And yeah, I highly recommend it to anyone who is skeptical out there, because I am the most skeptical when it comes to this series. And I'm glad that Nintendo put it out there onto the Switch Online service, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have checked it out. I think that's one of the benefits of the way they have done Virtual Console this time around is, I'll play Jelly Boy for 2 hours. Why not? Fucking, I would never buy it of my own accord. I wouldn't spend my own money on it. And unlike you, I didn't buy DK94 on the 3DS, so it was a good opportunity to be like, well, it's a good way to see if I will gel with it or if I bounce off it. And yeah, I'm gelling with it a lot more than I expected. So a great little game that definitely deserves all the praise that it's had all over the years. So I'm glad to have finally gotten to Donkey Kong on the Game Boy.
Metroid Prime, and now this. Like,
I know, yeah. Look, I'm a changed man. It's taken 10 years, but we finally got there. Finally changed some of my opinions.
10 years and a hugely successful Balatro release, and you've relaxed on a few.
That's it. That's all it takes. Excellent. Well, we have one more game to chat about, Matt, and it may be the most TNL game of all time. You were like, hey, take a look at what I've been playing, and what should we talk about? And I immediately went for this individual game. So tell us about Tank Troopers.
Yeah, so full disclosure on this one, I have been working on another new release recently, which has been made by Takaya Imamura, who was a art director at Nintendo for like 30 years. So I've been working on a different game that he released recently. And in the process of like researching his like previous work and stuff like that, one of his very last Nintendo games before he left Nintendo a few years ago was a 3DS game called Tank Troopers. And I was like, I am sure I've heard of Tank Troopers. This rings a bell. I remember it being like a Nintendo game in my head, but I think I'd thought of it as being like one of those ones that Nintendo picks up and publishes, right, from a third party or something. And no, it's just a full-on first-party Nintendo 3DS game that happens to come out. Let me just double-check. I'm pretty sure it came out in the year of our Lord, 2017.
Yes, it was Switch year, in fact, it came out.
Yeah, worldwide, it released in February 2017. So
wow, so right before the the release of Switch. Yeah. That's like awkward timing.
Almost exactly 2 weeks before the Switch came out, and it's like, well, no wonder I did not play about this nor know about it. Like, that just makes perfect sense. So, but it was one of those ones that I really wanted to give a try. So I had to dive in, and it's this very interesting, what I would say is probably a very multiplayer focused game with a much bigger single player element than I had expected to do. I thought I would jump in for like a few, I don't know, like Mario Kart battle mode things with AI.
Right.
But it has a single player mode, which is just listed up front as as a load of missions, basically. So it's like
that's really interesting to me, because I do remember this showing up in Nintendo Directs and being like, oh, well, that's annoying that it's multiplayer only, because it feels like with the dying embers of 3DS, no one's going to be playing this anymore, and I'm not going to be able to find people to play this online with. Like, I was very interested in it, but I was like, oh, well, it's basically just for multiplayer. I'm just going to ignore it, basically, at that point. So it's surprising to hear how much of a single-player offering there is.
Mate, it's bold of you to assume that it had online multiplayer.
oh, right. Yes, that was it. It was local only, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yes. Oh my God, that's
Local
why.
only
That was even more of a nail in the coffin, wasn't it? Jesus.
Which, it's one of those things where my brain was like, oh yeah, that's a classic, like, I don't know, Nintendo 3DS thing. And then I was like, wait, no, we played Metroid Prime Federation Force online a few years ago.
Exactly.
And that worked perfectly. How did this not?
Right.
So I've got no idea why this didn't end up with online multiplayer, but I had to play through this single player campaign, which is not, shouldn't call it a campaign because it has no story element to it. There's no like connection between each mission, but it's much more like the Mario Kart DS mission mode, is how I describe it.
Oh wow, now you're selling me on it. Now I need to go find. Well, now here's the thing: was this ever released physically, or was it a digital exclusive?
I want to say it's a digital exclusive.
Oh, well, it's lost to time then. In that case, no one will ever play it again.
Yes, well, if you wanted to, there.
There's some ways maybe you could do it.
Yeah,
but yes.
Sure. So yeah, and it's very Mario Kart DS mission mode. It starts you off very, very easy and simple, so that you will actually get put in like a proper like arena, and it'll be like kill 3 enemy tanks. And you're like, okay, fine. And the controls are a very 3DS, a very sort of Federation Force, if I'm honest, where you've got like there's some motion involved. There's also you have tank controls where you push forward to go forward, back to go back, and you turn. So proper like tank controls. But then if you tap the shoulder button, I think it is, your tank goes in a straight line and you enter what they call artillery mode. So your tank will just keep moving forward in a straight line, but you can aim full 360 around the tank. So
interesting. Okay.
Once you get a grip of it, what you're doing is you'll be clicking into artillery mode, firing, and then as you know you have to turn, you click again, start turning your tank to go in the other direction, then click again for artillery mode while your tank moves. And once you play a few of these missions, it becomes quite a good mode of, like, the controls work considering it's a single stick 3DS game. It's better than I'd expect it to be. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And so yeah, the first ones are simple stuff like that, and then as the missions go on, you get more and more interesting, like, fun things. You get like forts that you need to break down, and it'll put you on a map where you need to like cross some bridges, and it'll use the same maps over and over again, but it'll add obstacles to those maps, so some routes will be cut off. And it'll be like, okay, destroy the enemy base, it's guarded by loads of things. Sometimes it's like push a ball. Sometimes it turns to Rocket League, basically, where you're shooting a ball. And again, very Federation Force, where like you shoot.
Right, I was gonna say, like, Rocket League seems to be a big inspiration for these Nintendo online experiences for some reason.
Yeah, really, really strangely so. Like, so if you shoot the bottom of a ball, it chips up like it does in Federation Force. If you hit the top of it, it goes like flatter. And you've got to like move a ball into a goal. And then there's ones where you have to move bombs onto enemy bases to destroy them. So you can't shoot an enemy base, but you can hit a bomb towards it. But enemies can also shoot the bomb and like push it away from you. And yeah, over the course of sort of like 30 missions, this is what you get chucked. There'll be balloons that you have to pop with your thing, and each balloon will have different points. And there'll be one mission where it'll be like you need to get over 100. But then a mission later on where it's like you need to get exactly 150. Like, so you can't accidentally shoot other balloons.
Oh boy.
There was one mission that absolutely drove me mad where what you were fighting, you were given... I'm really sorry, I forgot a major element of this as well. The missions, you can either take them on with your own tank or your own little person, and each tank trooper has their own ability.
It's a bit like Advanced Wars Commanders in a sense.
Yes, yeah. So you build up a bar over time, and then you use the ability. Some abilities will make you go faster, which is like quite simple. Some will turn you in, like, will put smoke around you, so enemies can't see you. You basically turn invisible.
Okay. Nice.
Some will let you shoot electricity, which stuns enemies. Some will let you shoot like grenades rather than normal bullets that explode when your enemy hit them. So you can either choose your own tank, which has its own stats, and your own trooper, or, and this is what I did, and I think this worked really well, you let the game pick it for you per each mission. So it's very specifically designed around that tank and that trooper.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of reminds me a little bit of the way that Codename Steam would give you a recommendation of what characters to take into a mission, so you didn't have to like second guess before you went into it what would work the best, essentially.
Yeah, it's very, very like that. And you find, especially the later missions you go on, it'll give you like 3 or 4 troopers that you can choose between on the fly. And you go, okay, I could only beat this level by using all of their combination of abilities.
Right.
But the game also never tells you this. There's no tutorial. If I'd maybe read a digital manual, I'd have known. But like early on, I was just pressing the touchscreen to use the trooper ability, and then I was like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this has done. Has this helped me? Has this not? But by the end, you start to get really good. And there's one mission where you're fighting a tiny little tank that is like zipping around, and it is invisible unless you're close to it. And you're also in like dense fog. And
great,
because I'd let the game choose for me, it had basically chosen me the slowest tank possible to make this like a fun, challenging mission.
Oh no.
And while I hated it, I was really glad that I played it in that specific way, because it really did make it a challenge. And the tank trooper they gave me was the fast one, the one that makes your tank faster. So like using that at the right time to close them down. Yeah, it was very Mario Kart mission mode. Very I'm trying to think. There's definitely other games that have done like similar things that I can't think off the top of my head. But yeah, it probably lasted me. I'd say probably lasted me like maybe 3 or 4 hours.
That's
overall,
great.
And I had a very nice time with it. It's got a really lovely art style. All the tank troopers are like really nicely designed. Like it's that you can see the Imamura art coming through like really strongly.
Right.
And
they all feel very distinctive, right? Like they
yes.
all speak to their character and like their costumes and stuff like that, which I think is very good.
Yeah, it's just got
what
that,
you want from something like this. A bit of charm.
It's just got that classic like ARMS problem where like it feels like Nintendo designed all these very cool characters and then didn't chuck a story on it to get you invested in them. Like they do the Overwatch thing of making this really cool, distinct cast that you can tell them apart really easily. But then Nintendo don't go the extra mile to be like, now here's why you're interested in them, which is like
exactly
something they have done with like F-Zero, right? You play F-Zero and there's like rivalries and there's like text about all these characters and like backstories and things like that. But I think that's where they struggled with stuff like Tank Troopers and ARMS. And if we get another one of these games from them where they do like a cast of characters like this, I want more of that. Just give us like little cutscenes, give us rivalries, like that fighting game style thing where, like the Mortal Kombat thing where people chat to each other before fights or whatever. Yes. That's the sort of thing I'd like to see from this. But yeah, lovely little game. I really, really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I think if I had known that it had like the mission stuff that you've been talking about, I would have bought this before the eShop closed, but I didn't. So unfortunately, I have not. But I'm sure I'll figure out a way to check it out somehow at some point in time. But it's interesting because you very nicely provided us with a code for Imamura's new game, which I would like to play, which is more of a visual novel affair. That I'm very interested in, and so I guess his work with characters is much more obvious in something like that, unlike a game like this where it's not really forefronted. It's more about, okay, we're going to be gameplay first and we'll have these cool characters, but we can't really, there's no story to wrap them around, so they just look cool and I guess that's it. So that makes more sense.
He must have some sort of like military, like he must like the military stuff because he's done Steel Diver and the sequel to that, right? Which is the very sort of...
I was going to talk about Steel Divers because, I mean, like, that feels like the analog for this on 3DS, right? If you're talking about, like, beginning to end, like, they're almost opening and closing chapters to 3DS. The Steel Diver right at the beginning and Tank Troopers right at the dying embers is, feels like they're cousin games in a way,
Absolutely. Bang on.
But yeah, Steel Divers, it never really had much identity from a character perspective. I think that was the interesting thing about it. It was like, here's some fucking just submarines, right? It's just that's just what they are. They're submarines, and that's about it. Do you know if he worked on Sub Wars, the second Steel Divers game, or spin-off of Steel Divers?
I think he did. Yeah, I think he worked across both the Steel Divers games and Tank Troopers from memory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things about Tank Troopers that definitely stood out to me. The Federation Force comparison, the Steel Divers stuff. Like, it felt like a game that I should have played at some point, but didn't. So, yeah, I appreciate you bringing it here, and hopefully some more people will get to check it out. And I don't know, God forbid, at some point in person, maybe people can play it somewhere, because you can't do it online anyway. The ironic thing is, like, oh yeah, it's such a shame Nintendo's online service is gone, we can't play it anymore. But no, you could never play it online in the first place. So, like,
madness, right? Absolute madness.
Just baffling decision making.
On Switch, maybe, a game that has split screen and you can whack on a TV, but like,
right.
3DS, come on now.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable. But who knows? Maybe there's a group of hardcore Tank Troopers fans congregating at like a PAX or something who'll be out there playing it together. I know that's the case for like some of the other kind of games, like Federation Force had that whole Discord server before it shut down, and obviously Kid Icarus was another one with an online kind of multiplayer that people were really into, and I think there are some fan servers up there now for those still, but
what I would tell you about the popularity of Tank Troopers is that the image that you see on GG when you go and see my playlist is one that I had to make and submit.
Okay, yeah. I've had to do that a few times for certain games, but that definitely says quite a lot, doesn't it?
For a first-party Nintendo game.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you one that you might be surprised at that I had to submit was Nintendogs Plus Cats.
Really?
Which did not have, I guess because the DS box or 3DS boxes are so specific size-wise that maybe there was never vertical key art of Nintendogs Plus Cats, but yeah, I had to make that myself, that one. So the one that's on GG is one that I photoshopped together, so there you go. Lovely. Well, that, I think, is going to do us for the video games we've been playing. Don't go anywhere, however, because we will be back after the break to talk about the Nintendo Switch 1 reveal and what we can expect for Switch 2. See you in a bit. Alright everybody, welcome back to the second half of today's show. It's time to talk about it. That's right, Nintendo Switch, the thing everyone's talking about non-stop all day, every day. And we're coming up, as we said, on the Switch 2 reveal. And I think, we'll have some thoughts about what that's going to be potentially, but I thought it would be good to couch it in what happened last time, what Nintendo did. We can see some patterns, if there are any, and if there's going to be any kind of replication of that. But there were kind of two phases to the Switch reveal. Obviously, we had the October video that came out, the trailer, where they were like, hey, this is what it looks like, this is what it's called, here's like snippets of games potentially coming out on it, and that was about it. And I do remember quite clearly that day in particular, because I think the night before Nintendo tweeted Mario Behind the Curtain, and so people were... Which apparently, according to the Kit and Krista podcast, that the person who did that was not favorably looked upon at Nintendo. It was a social media person apparently who kind of went rogue and did that, which I think, it does feel like very non-Nintendo to do something like that.
Agreed,
but
yeah.
I also liked it quite a lot. I thought it was quite cheeky in a way that also lent into the fact that everyone was just fucking starving out here. We were just like, give us anything, please. And they eventually did. Yeah, what were your thoughts when that first kind of October reveal happened, Matt?
Oh, it was one cause before the October reveal, right? There'd been a lot of discussion around what the NX was at that point, and the the sort of hybrid handheld thing. I think Eurogamer had reported on it at that point, and
there were the infamous leaks that were that weird shaped oval thing, and people were looking at the trees in the office.
That as well, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But the actual hybrid thing with like the controllers coming off the side. I remember Eurogamer reported on that, and Laura Kate Dale had reported on that, and so that wasn't too surprising. But seeing it was more the confidence of that trailer, right? For the first Switch trailer where you had, Breath of the Wild, the guy like sat at home and then walking the dog, and people playing like NBA at the basketball court, and the infamous Karen on the rooftop.
Of course,
with,
who could forget?
Mario Odyssey, which we saw, 2 seconds of?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, yeah.
Without a name or any context. To the point where, like, there was so much negativity around Nintendo at the time. Like, the idea that Nintendo was always making the wrong decisions throughout the Wii U era. That I remember people thought that Mario game was going to be an auto runner. Because the 2-second clip just shows Mario running in a straight line forward.
That's an insane thing to say.
I think in the wake of like Mario Run, they were like, they're doing like a 3D Mario auto runner. I think it just speaks to how much like, not negativity, but like you always went into Nintendo stuff like assuming the worst. Not in terms of games, because we all enjoyed what came out, but I think in terms of like what their impact on the market would be, you'd be like, they're going to do something silly. No one's going to want it. Only us, like 10 Wii U owners are going to want to buy this. Or
of
whatever.
Course, yeah.
But that was a confident trailer. It showed, it was very young adult, 20-year-olds, which was very different to their Wii U and 3DS marketing, and also just Breath of the Wild, right? It was so still felt like within our grasp, Breath of the Wild at that point. I think we'd just come off the E3 where all the previews had dropped for the Wii U version, so seeing that on a handheld was like crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty wild stuff. I was definitely very excited about it. I think the thing for me that surprised me the most was how kind of luxury it looked, right? Like, I think Nintendo hardware had a tendency to be quite rugged and robust and built for children. And I was like, that doesn't look like a toy. It didn't look like something that you would throw in a backpack. It looked like something that needed a case and needed a screen protector, and you would want to be careful with it and not drop it because it could crack because it was high quality, basically. That was the thing that really struck me about it, I think. And I think the other thing that struck me about it was the fact that we saw Skyrim. I wouldn't shut up about that. I was like, what? I was like, Bethesda on Nintendo, surely you jest. That's not real. But it turned out that they were an early supporter, which was very surprising, I think.
But even that was weird, right? Where it was like, that was October. We didn't get the January presentation till 3-4 months later. Mm-hmm. And it was like, and no one at Bethesda or Nintendo would officially say that Skyrim was on Switch. Yeah. And you were like, is that just like a proof of concept thing? Like, are they actually bringing Skyrim there, or are they just showing that it could be Skyrim? Like,
is it similar to what they did with like Zelda on Wii U, where it's like, it's a tech demo, it's not a real game, it's just like, hey, they could do this, but will it? Is the question. So that was definitely quite strange.
They left a lot unanswered from that thing. It showed off the fact that we had like a Pro controller. It showed off the fact that it had cartridges. But beyond that, there was a lot of questions that needed answering going into this January presentation.
Yeah, although I will say I feel like it answered more questions than the Switch 2 reveal has done at this point. Because the Switch 2 reveal is very much, and it's interesting, we'll get into this when you get into the January presentation, but there is a hardware-style video in the January presentation that is exactly what they just did for the first reveal of Switch 2. Yeah, they're taking a different approach, and there definitely will be a different approach here because it's a Nintendo Direct for Switch 2 and not a live presentation. Matt, do you think there's ever a time again that we'll see Nintendo get out onto a stage in front of a live audience and announce stuff?
I don't know. I think the only place that actually worked was at E3. Maybe like a Game Awards announcement for a game, potentially. But for hardware,
but like doing their own show, doing their own kind of like announcement.
I know. I feel almost even more like that, especially having come off the back of rewatching this January presentation, and being like, it's a bit rough, isn't it? The live thing. It doesn't quite work in the way that I remember the E3 presentations working. I think of those presentations and I'm like, those were great, and I forget all the awkward pauses and the gaps and the there's sometimes like 20 minutes where you'd be like, there's nothing interesting here for me, like, to be watching this from home, compared to the Nintendo Direct formula these days, where, even if they concentrate on a game that I'm not interested in, it'll be 5 minutes, then you're on to the next thing, and on to the next thing. It's, I would like them to. I'll be proved wrong within a week now, won't I? Where they come out on stage with a live Switch 2 Direct.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. But let's recap this presentation. So I rewatched this today. Took a bunch of notes on it. Lots of interesting little things and tidbits about it. But this presentation happened in January of 2017, and it was pretty much 2 months out from the actual release of the system. Let's kind of go through it, and we can chat about the little things that happened. So it opens with a big countdown, and they count down from like 1 minute essentially. So it counts all the way down, and as it's counting down, like the lights in the house go crazy. It starts becoming like a rave essentially, and they do this kind of montage of like Switch clicks with like motion graphics and stuff, but it never like shows it full screen. It's only just like showing it in the off screen, like as people in the theater are experiencing it, I guess, to give that sense of like, oh, everybody's here, you're all here with us, which was kind of flashy, I would say. And then on walks Kimishima, former president of Nintendo, the interim president of Nintendo, who basically just says, hey, here's what Switch is. Again, let's restate it in case you didn't watch our trailer, and give you kind of a detailed introduction to what the hardware and software is. And he opens with release date and price, which is such a bold thing, and I didn't remember it this way.
No, neither did I.
He literally is like, and it's coming out this day, and this is how much it's going to cost. Anyway, let's go on with the show. Which it's funny when you look at like the PlayStation 5 reveal and even the Xbox stuff. Like that's the thing they saved till the very end. It's the last thing. It's like, and here's it's coming this date, and this is the price. And the funniest thing is he says, for Europe we don't have a price. Just ask your local retailer how much it costs, which I found very funny because I'm like, yeah, that's Europe. We're all competing for price over here. So yeah, they didn't tell us.
Yeah, especially at like 4 o'clock in the morning Europe time, right?
Yeah.
And it's just
exactly.
Go check when they wake up tomorrow. Go check what they've said. Like we don't know.
pretty much, which is pretty funny. I don't know if this will be the same for Switch 2. I imagine they will wait until the end for the Switch 2 to say it this time. It just struck me as odd. I'm not sure why they did it.
It's really odd because it's that thing of like the way to do it is the way that the PS5 Pro did it recently, and everything else is like, let's sell you on the why you want the product first.
Yes.
Let's give you all the information. This is why you want this thing, and then at the end, this is what we think it's worth. Like right? And you're like, okay, well, I do want this. That is like, if the price is a bit high, and it's always a bit high at the moment.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, but that all looked really cool. Whereas I think. And from memory, well, no, actually not from. I had forgotten that price was even like an issue for Switch.
Right.
But I read back through a few articles from post the presentation, and it was a really big talking point. Like in 2017, you could buy a base PS4 for less than $299. So like that price was considered really quite high at that point, I think, and the idea of it competing against Xbox and PlayStation, who were currently undercutting it, I think was actually quite a big deal at that point. And for a handheld console and for a Nintendo console, which the Wii U struggled to sell, a lot of people said the Wii U should have dropped in price a lot earlier.
Of course, yeah.
So I think then,
the Wii U actually came out the gate more expensive because I believe the high tier Wii U was $350, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
so I think for them coming out the gate at this, and for what was, a handheld, which had always traditionally been their much cheaper console, it was a much bigger talking point. I think it speaks to the success of the Switch, right? Where, like, we've forgotten that now.
Oh, yeah, completely forgot.
I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head that anyone was talking about the price of it, but it seemed like a big deal at the time.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of things completely forgot about, did you remember that the Switch Online was not a paid service until fall of 2017? So Kimishima's like, okay, and we're going to have this online service. It will be available to try for everybody until we'll ask you to pay for it in 2017 at the end of the year. Which, yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense in the fact that Splatoon came out and Mario Kart came out within the first few months. So you had a lot of online games to try and to play. But yeah, we didn't have to pay any fee until then, and I believe it did come into the end of 2017, or maybe it got delayed, because I feel like there was something there where it was like, oh, it's actually not ready yet, the online service, but maybe I'm wrong on that fact. And I can't remember if the online, the virtual console stuff came at the same time or not, but it was definitely the NSO stuff. Yeah.
I feel like NSO games launched in my brain's saying 2018, but
so maybe it's the case that it was delayed until 2018 for paying for Switch Online. Maybe it was even further than that. But anyway, in this presentation, they say it's coming in fall 2017. And then they also announced something that I've also taken for granted now. Region locking was gone. So there was no longer region locking. And it's very interesting to me that that's a talking point as part of their presentation. It's like, you can now buy games from other countries and you're not going to be able to, or you're not going to be locked off from them anymore, which, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big theme of this entire presentation, was Nintendo actually tackling things that they've been criticized for, like, head on, which is something that Nintendo did not do a lot of before then, and also has not done a lot of since this.
No.
But it felt like a real turning point where they had to come out the gates and be like, all of these things that people have been, like, complaining about for ages, not saying it in as many words, but like rewatching it, you're like, oh yeah, that was the thing they didn't do before and now they're doing. Oh yeah, like I had that about 3 or 4 times with different things. Right. Like, they're really coming out and being like, no, we are attempting to change here. Here are some real big examples of like how things are going to be different this time to previously. It felt as much for investors as it did for us, if that makes sense. Like, it felt like it was trying to convince the world that Nintendo wasn't down and out. And I think I read a Guardian article from post the presentation, and it literally opens with like many people calling this Nintendo's last chance. I think it's really easy to forget. Like I said earlier, like there was a ton of pessimism and negativity around the Wii U era Nintendo, and the Switch so quickly cleared that up that I keep forgetting until I go back to this stuff. I've got a fun little stat for you, actually. I think you'll enjoy this one. Do you know how many Wii U's were sold in the UK as of December 2017?
Oh, goodness. So, like, 13 million worldwide. The UK, as a percentage of that market, quite thin. I'm going to say, like, 450,000 or something stupidly small.
390,000.
No, it couldn't be less than that. I was like, oh, maybe it's like 500,000, maybe it's higher, but 350,000.
390, but
sorry, 390,000.
Low,
my
right?
God, that's staggering. Yeah.
Compare that to, I think the Switch. There's no like definitive numbers for the Switch in the UK, but I think it's surpassed 5 million on account of having surpassed like an Xbox release or something from Chris String. I think people have worked out that it's past 5 million as of like 2022.
That's
it just puts Nintendo in a completely different like market position in the UK, especially. I think a lot of the conversation around it is the US, where like it obviously had done poorly, but over here in the UK and Europe, I think the Wii U was so unbelievably poor that like especially from UK media, there was a real question of like, can Nintendo do anything to come back at all? And this presentation feels laser focused at just being like, yes, we can. Here's why. Mm-hmm.
Hey, now you can buy games from Japan.
Yeah,
lots of benefits. I see.
Just being like, we're not going to be as weird and strict as we always have been, right?
For sure, yeah. And I think that definitely it made a difference. And now they don't need to anymore. But it was nice that they did back then, at least. So yeah. Then Shinya Takahashi comes out, obviously head of EPD. Oversees all of Nintendo stuff. He's got Bill Trinan translating for him. And he basically, it's very funny. He goes through like all the previous controllers to talk about like each of these innovations. One of the things he says is, we put a handle on Nintendo GameCube, and then talks about like, even back then we were experimenting with a portable home system you could take on the go. And I was like, okay, all right, buddy, that's a little rich, but I appreciate that they call it out. And then he says Switch has inherited the DNA of all those consoles. He's like, it has everything from all of these in it. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe, but I feel like they're kind of like talking it up a little bit in that. But I thought that was quite interesting. And then this is where we get the kind of the hardware trailer breakdown, which is like, oh, let's spin around and see, and what is it? How does it work? And then you talk about the play styles. You can put it on the TV, you can put it on the tabletop, you can do all this, and they are really hammering home like the explanation of how the system works, make it as easy and digestible as possible. One of the funny notes from this section, Bill Trinan, so he's translating over the top, and you can hear when he's translating for Shinya Takahashi, he just talks in a normal voice, and then when he's translating for the Hardware trailer, he's doing like an announcer voice, and he's like, and you will be able to do it on the tabletop. Like, it's very funny how he just changes his intonation to be like very announcery for the video versus just the regular cadence for the voiceover, which I thought was
true
quite
professional.
funny. True professional Bill Trinan. He has to speak Japanese later in the presentation, but we'll get to that. Then Koizumi comes out and does his infamous Joy-Con breakdown where he lies down on the couch for half a second. He shows off the grip. He shows off, hey, you can use Amiibo with these things. It's got all this tech in it. And he says an important line. In the future, it will be able to capture video as well, which is referring to the capture button on Switch. Another thing I forgot, you couldn't capture video from the beginning. You could only take screenshots, which now that I look back on it, I'm like, how do we ever live without that? It was such a core part of like sharing stuff. And obviously these days you can't even share anything on social media through Switch.
It's almost had its heyday now, right? Because like the easy Twitter integration combined with when Twitter was good was like it was a real big part of like Switch's marketing almost. Like
Absolutely,
it was letting the players doing the marketing for them, and the fact that stuff was 30 seconds long, right, meant that it was never ever a length that wasn't good for social media, and people were only capturing the very best moments and chucking them out there, and it made it so easily bite-sized and shareable. Such a real big part of that. I missed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is still a way to do it. It's just a little bit of a hassle. Yeah, it's not great. And I think it means that Nintendo just lose a lot of visibility and just general, like, I feel like Animal Crossing had such a kind of burst through that as well, not just the pandemic stuff, just people sharing their wild towns on social media and like, look, I made this entire city into like a robot town or whatever, right? Like, people were going crazy with that stuff. Like, my most viral tweet of all time is 2 screenshots of an Animal Crossing thing about me giving a cat a toilet and the cat giving me a litter box, like I gave it a litter box and it gave me a toilet, but that tweet blew the fuck up, and it's because that kind of shareability of those moments was so easy and accessible that I just like took those 2 screenshots and threw it out there, and like next day it's just like going crazy. So yeah, the video stuff, the capture stuff, I mean, is a huge thing that every console does now, but I think Switch, to me, is still the best implementation. Like, I find when I do PlayStation, there's a lag to it. It's like you press it, the menu comes up, then you can press, like, take a screenshot, like, there's a delay there that I find a bit frustrating. I've never owned an Xbox, I don't know how the experience is there, but even on PC, it's like, okay, I'm going to bind it to this keyboard shortcut, and then I have to find the folder it's in and share it. Like, Switch was the easiest by far in terms of sharing stuff. So he also says a line, we call this sharing the joy, a line that I don't remember them saying after that, so that one I think died. Then he lies down on the couch, and then we get a video of him with like a white cloth, and this is where we get the infamous ice cubes and showing rock paper scissors for the motion camera and filling the glass with water and all that good stuff. So spent quite a long time, I think. I would say like 15 to 20 minutes. The first 15 to 20 minutes of this presentation is focused on all of this stuff. And then we get our first game, basically. And there are 8 games I counted as part of this presentation, which is an interesting number, interesting benchmark that we can use when thinking about the Switch 2. But the first game is, of course, 1-2 Switch. It's a cowboy game, and that's what they show mainly. And then they show a bunch of people in like colored backgrounds having fun, which 1-2 Switch, we know, ended up being something that didn't really take off. But I remember this is when I started getting a little worried in this presentation. Yes. I don't know about you, Matt, but this was when I was like, I don't know about this, I
had the exact same thing. I was like, okay, cool. We've really, really explained the hardware. Like, there was a point, I remember even at the time I was watching it, I was like, okay, I get it. Okay, we're still going with the hardware. Good. Okay, this is quite long. And then games, you're like, okay, games, good. And then it was immediately, it looked like Nintendo Land or Wii Sports or something.
It was a Wii era kind of approach, right?
It was that thing that seemed to have fallen out of fashion with people. I think by this point in the the Wii U's life, there'd already been quite a lot written about the Nintendo's like Blue Ocean strategy and how it hadn't worked because people bought a Wii for Wii Sports and then never bought any other games because they bought the Wii Sports box,
right?
And didn't need to get anything else. And I think at this point people were already trying to like dissect what had gone wrong with the Wii U and the fact they'd followed that Blue Ocean thing. So seeing them go so early on with something like that for Switch, I think made me start to get worried as well.
Yeah, for sure. We have the hardware director, Koichi Kawamoto, who comes out and he talks about looking into the eyes of your opponent is the real game. You don't look at the TV for this. And then he's like, we want this to be at parties, events, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it seems like that was the direction they were going. And they announced it's coming in March 3rd on the launch of the system, which makes a lot of sense. And then we kind of go back to basically Koizumi here acts as the anchor throughout all these, and you kind of return to him. Every time we return to him, he says, let's switch to this, and you get the click sound, basically. So
that's the good shit.
He's doing it. He's doing the brand. It's all on point. It's very good. We get to game 2, which is Arms. I don't remember this trailer when I was watching it, but it's a Japanese man walks on screen and a Japanese girl walks on screen, and they're just like regular people, and then their arms turn into arms of the game Arms, and then they start fighting each other in the cinematic. It's a trailer for Arms. Looks wild and interesting, but obviously it's very motion control focused. And we have the producer coming out, and he talks about that it's like boxing, but it's also like shooting, is what he says. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's a way to describe Arms. And talks about the motion controls and how they work. It's I think it's at this point that I'm like, oh no, because we've had 1-2 Switch and now we're having another motion controlled game, and I'm like, do they remember why bad things happened to them as a company? And it feels like they're leaning in the wrong direction at this point. I do think Arms is a game that I would love to see them do something else with at some point. I think it's such, like we were talking about earlier, such a unique, interesting universe with characters that are actually super distinct. But I think gameplay-wise and just everything to do with it, it just never really took off, unfortunately.
Yeah, because I really like Arms. Like, I probably played like 10 to 15 hours of Arms, like mostly online and mostly with a controller, like not motion controls.
Yeah.
So I really like Arms, but I was at the exact same thing, 1-2 Switch, all bit worried, but like probably fine, and then immediately following that with Arms, like in retrospect feels like a bad decision.
I get why they did it, because they're in a flow of like we just talked about the Joy-Cons, we're explaining how they work, and so here are 2 examples of games that will use those directly. But you're right, because they do it back to back, it creates that from the hardcore Nintendo audience, it creates that kind of like, what's going wrong here kind of feeling.
Immediately start bristling a little bit, like, oh no. I think with the Arms 1-2 Switch, and also like the price up front and being like higher than most people were predicting, most analysts were predicting, it really makes this like a presentation of 2 halves, where like for the first half you're like, oh no. I think combined with the slightly awkward presentation as well, you're like, is this okay? Are Nintendo gone? Like, is this going to do anything? Yeah, definitely wasn't great signals. They then say releasing this spring, which I realize is funny in context because of Springman, but anyway, it did end up coming out in April, I believe. And then we go back to Koizumi, and he keeps saying, let's switch to this, and we go to game 3, which is Splatoon 2, and it looks like Splatoon. I think this was one where I was like, oh, okay, I guess they're calling it a sequel, but it feels like it's pretty similar to the original. So Nogami comes out, who, of course, is the guy in charge of the Splatoon franchise. This is where the translators start having a hard time, where they're like, oh, no, what is he saying? How do I translate this? Because they're doing real-time translation based on what people are saying on the stage. And some people don't stick to a script. We'll get to that later. Yep. But he basically, he pretends, he does this all in like he's pretending he's a real researcher. The squids, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And he's like in a lab coat. He has the splat doolies, and he's like, "Hey, here's a new weapon, the splat doolies." It's like, we've been researching this. He talks about the Pro Controller, which I think is the first time the Pro Controller gets a mention in this presentation. And I don't remember if they had announced the Pro Controller prior to this. They must have done, because otherwise you don't just...
They showed it in that October one, because it's the Skyrim one where they do that, where he's on the plane, he comes back, he docks it, and then he picks up the Pro Controller that's in front of his TV. So they definitely showed it. They definitely had shown it off, but I don't know if they had like gone into detail on it.
Not talked about it that much, yeah. So I guess that's when it kind of gets brought up directly. And yeah, he talks about specific inputs like press X to move to where someone else is on the map. And I think they did that because the Wii U was so touch driven that they wanted to clear up like, oh, how is this going to work on Switch compared to Wii U, basically, for the, again, 10 people who had played Splatoon 1 on Switch. It says it's releasing this summer and very clearly talks about, okay, we're going to do long-term plans and updates, and there's going to be a lot of things added to it, which, became a staple of the Splatoon franchise as it went forward. And he does this pose, which is the Splatoon 2 pose, which is basically him trying to spell out 2 with the splat doolies. He does it once, and then he does it again before he leaves the stage, so that's a good bit. He's very funny. I like that man a lot, and I think he should be protected.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to... sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I was just say, on the basis of that, like him doing the 2 thing, did you find the fact that like Nintendo seemed to cut out basically all the audience sound?
Yeah.
Like, they weren't recording the audience. So like, I remember watching it at the time, and it felt awkward because there was clearly a reaction happening from the audience,
right?
But you couldn't hear it, so all the things they were doing were like falling flat as far as like we could tell at home. I found that really odd from like a live show thing compared to the E3 or like the Game Awards, right, where you get like cheers and stuff like that. I remember the fact that this was like people were doing stuff like that, like, making a 2 sign while like really throwing yourself into the pose and just like nothing happening made the whole thing feel slightly awkward. I don't know if you've had that from it at all.
Definitely, yeah. I think the lack of that means that it comes off to the live audience as strange, and yeah, just something they probably should have considered a bit more before putting this whole thing together. And maybe one of the reasons why they just don't do live events anymore, because it's less effective in that sense, and you can't kind of land jokes in that effective way if you haven't kind of thought it through. So yeah, I think they definitely could have done a better job with it. The other thing I wanted to mention is I found it very hard to find an official version of this stream anywhere.
Yes.
Like, did Nintendo never upload it? Did they I couldn't find
now.
Yeah, I couldn't find a clean... And is that because of licensing issues with music or something? I don't know, but yeah, it seems like it's been nuked from the internet, essentially. And the only things that remain are, the trailers that they put up after the fact. So, very strange. I had to watch some... I think Nintendojo had put up a version of it, rebroadcasted. But yeah, it was a bit of a bizarre situation. So we get back to Koizumi, and he says, "What squid you think?" Because that's a classic Nintendo pun that everybody likes. And we go into Game 4, which is Mario Odyssey. So we finally see a full look at the game. And I think the brilliant thing about Mario Odyssey is the layers in which they revealed this game, right?
Yes.
Because the original thing was, here's a little snippet of it. And here they're like, wow, look at these weird worlds we're going to explore. Let's go to New Donk City. Let's show the cap being thrown and you can platform with the cap. And the cap is a character now and all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, that looks so great and innovative. And it looks like they're going back to Mario 64 style stuff. And we still don't know about the wild transformation stuff, which is what they save for the E3 that year, which is like one of the best trailers from that E3 is Mario just turning into all these other things, right? So I think just the way they handled Odyssey is just really a masterclass in revealing stuff about a video game. And I think this trailer was great on its own, and it didn't even need that stuff. It had so much exciting things that, we were getting hyped about. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this one.
Yeah. This one just shows off all the art styles, which is so different from like 3D World. I know, like, in retrospect now, right, we're all big 3D World fans, but I think when you were like a Nintendo fan and you wanted something that was going to make other people excited, 3D World struggled with that a little bit, and
for sure,
that first trailer
that first trailer was really bad for 3D World. Like, it felt so generic and like it had nothing interesting about it. And I think it was like a couple of months later they had a subsequent trailer where I was like, oh, this is the juice. Like, this is what we really wanted from it. But that first one was a real disappointment, I think.
So immediately coming to this trailer and being like this weird New York City style world, and then immediately this really distinct, like, colourful, like, Day of the Dead Mexican world. And then, like, you're like, okay, we've got the normal grassy forest thing that Mario does all the time, but it's like, it's dark and there's like shafts of light coming through and there's these realistic looking robots. You're like, it's all so different looking for Mario. And like, art style shouldn't be such a big deal for Mario, but it made it so exciting watching this Mario that didn't look like anything that had come before compared to every other sort of Mario game from the 10 years before that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it really stood out, and it made me very excited for what this new Mario was potentially going to be. We then cut back to the stage, and Koizumi is now in person again. He now is wearing a red suit and the cappy hat as well, which is very nice. And he talks about like, oh, maybe you recognize some real-world locations from that trailer, obviously nodding to New York City with New Donk City and stuff like that, which is a very, very cool thing. And talks about how Cappy will be important to the game, but doesn't really go further beyond that. Says it's releasing in the holiday season, and we then move on. We then get 2 games back to back. We get Game 5, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and Game 6, Fire Emblem Warriors, both of which feel like very early trailers that were just designed to be like, hey, we have video games, more than anything else. I think the real Xenoblade 2 trailer doesn't come until that E3 as well. I think they opened with that at E3 of 2017. But this one was just like, oh, it's a field. Oh, he's running in a field. Oh, okay, and now here's a character and here's another thing. And I will say that it was, I think even at the time as a Xenoblade fan, I was like, oh, that's cool. It looks good, but like I don't really have a sense of what it is yet. Like they haven't really gone into detail about what it's going to mean and how different it is and that sort of stuff. So it didn't really hit super hard. And same thing for Fire Emblem Warriors. I mean, I'm already a bit of a hater on the Dynasty Warriors whole thing, but the idea of a Fire Emblem game being a Warriors game was like, surely that's the thing to get me in, and it didn't. So I think that probably says all you need to know. And yeah, it's very, very much a cinematic thing. It's like, here's some orbs and the Fire Emblem, there's the shield, and there's Marth for half a second. And I believe there was a Fire Emblem Direct that took place like a month after this, and they actually gave us more information about that in that Direct, because that Direct also had the remake of Fire Emblem 2 Gaiden that was then released on 3DS in 2017
one,
as well. Yes. Because that was a 2017 game, along with Metroid 2 that also got a 3DS release in 2017. So there were still 2017 3DS games coming out at that point in time.
Brand new stuff as well, crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Koizumi then comes out and talks about third-party partners. He says over 50 companies are working on games and over 80 games in development, which is, I think for Nintendo, quite a lot considering their previous
at the
system.
time that genuinely felt like a big deal. Like,
yes,
I remember seeing that and being like, are there genuinely 80 games in development? Whereas now, I mean, how many a year at this point? But yeah, that felt like a big deal at the time. Yeah.
Exactly. A day, more like, I think there's like 50 games on the eShop a week or something at this point. It's mad. But yeah, definitely significant for them. And then they start name-checking some partners. So they talk about Square Enix, and they're like, they're going to bring Dragon Quest X and Dragon Quest XI. Sad, of course, because the West has yet to see Dragon Quest X, and maybe one day I will before I die.
Waiting for that offline one, right?
Yeah, but that's one of my life goals. Is to finally play Dragon Quest X. Will I be able to? Who knows? Maybe I'll just have to learn Japanese. It might be the case, but we'll see. And then they also mentioned Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2 is coming as well. Should also mention Dragon Quest XI, the first game ever announced for the Nintendo NX. So that is a good historical title. But then we move on to Atlas, and they show a trailer for Shin Megami Tensei. It is SMT5, but we don't know it's SMT5 at the time. We just know it's a new SMT. Very, very teasery. I believe that this is, from this presentation, the game that released the latest, essentially. So of every game that came out, everything else came out before this did. Which I think this came out, was it 2 years ago now, in like 2023 or something? SMT5 was really recent, maybe 2022. But yeah, it took like 5 years for this game to release, from reveal here at the Switch reveal event to its actual eventual release on the system. I guess the true title is actually Metroid Prime 4, but that wasn't at this event, so that wouldn't count. That one is still in development and still is not released. So, and then he also mentions that there will be another Square Enix game with a new unique graphic style, which I assume is Octopath Traveler, but they didn't. And my memory says they announced Octopath at this event.
I saw Octopath in the version of the stream that I watched, just so you know.
Okay. So maybe the version of the stream that I watched had it cut out for some reason. That's
maybe,
very
but I definitely sort of like, because there was a big voiceover that was like Project Octopath Traveler.
Oh yes, they didn't show that trailer in the version of the stream I watched, so I must have missed it in that case. Okay, interesting. So that was there in that case. My memory wasn't incorrect. They did show Octopath Traveler. Okay, that makes it 9 games in that sense that were shown off. Okay, then we go to the most unhinged part of the presentation, which is, hey, let's get some third-party people out here to talk. So onto stage comes Toshihiro Nagoshi from Sega, the Yakuza series head, who now is at NetEase creating his own thing.
What did he come to announce?
He said, I would like to create an interesting game, is basically what he said. Like, I was listening to the translator, and I'm like, he's not saying anything. He's not saying anything of substance at all. He's like, oh, it's an interesting system, this Switch, isn't it? I would like to create an interesting game for it. And then he walks off stage, and I'm like, well, that was nothing.
It feels like he was pulled in at the very last moment.
It really does.
They just like pushed him on stage and like, just say you're making something. Like...
Yeah. They were like, hey, Sega, do you have anybody who can talk? Okay, Nagoshi, he's free. Let's put him out there. And he's like, sure.
He has good opinions on Nintendo systems, right? He thinks
of course,
they're good for the games that he makes.
Yeah, definitely should always put Yakuza games on Nintendo systems. That makes the most sense. Yeah, so we have that. Then we cut to a video of Todd Howard, and Todd Howard's like, I love Skyrim. It's coming to Switch. Boy, howdy, are you going to enjoy it on the go?
That was a big deal. Like,
it was a big deal.
I already knew about it, but just having them being like, we are doing that was cool. Genuinely, do you remember, was this before all of the Skyrim on everything memes? Or was this already part of it?
I think it became part of it, because I believe the refrigerator video for Bethesda was like an E3 prior to this. I think it was a 2016 E3 or something. So I do think we were in full meme mode for Skyrim at this point.
Nice.
So yeah, it did make sense, and it kind of went along the lines of everything else that had been going on for that game. Then everyone's favorite, Suda, walks out on stage. And the translator at this point has no fucking idea what's going on. So he talks about wrestling. He's like, indie games, I like them. And then there's a picture of Travis Touchdown on the screen. He's like, maybe I'll do something. And I think that ended up being Travis Strikes Again.
Yes.
The spin-off it didn't have any indie game. Like, the indie game stuff was, there were t-shirts of Hotline Miami that you could wear. That was the extent of the crossover, I believe.
Yeah, like, I think the point of it was, from like more in-depth interviews he did, was that he was like, he wanted that indie game spirit. Rather than making like a big No More Heroes game, he wanted to do like a load of different smaller things in one game. Right. But like you say, how would you know that? Because the translator sort of lets him talk for about 60 seconds without translating anything, and then seems to be in catch-up mode for the rest of the thing. I know it's a hard job, but I was listening to this guy and being like, did you tell someone that you could do this and you can't? Like,
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because I've seen the theory float around that like the translators were prepped with some sort of script that they were supposed to say, and Suda just went out on stage and said whatever the fuck he wanted instead of following the script.
I mean, he clearly did, right? Because there's a point where he points to the thing. He's like, "Can we get a picture up here?" Of Travis, and like as if they weren't gonna do that. Like,
right, exactly. Like it wasn't planned.
Yeah.
Oh my god. It was, that was crazy. And then Patrick Soderlund comes out, this time Bill Trinan translating into Japanese, because obviously the audience is Japanese and Patrick is speaking in English. He sounds very disingenuous, as any EA executive does. He says he's a big fan of Nintendo because he gave his son the middle name Luigi, which I was like, okay, all right, cool. And then he's like, FIFA's coming, so, enjoy that, I guess.
Yeah. That was a weird one as well, because I'm like, you didn't say specifically that you named your son Luigi because of Nintendo. You sort of just said, we like Nintendo, and you can see that because our son's middle name is Luigi. And I'm like, are you just sort of like banking on that? That's an odd thing. It's interesting because I was working at Activision at this time, during the time of this presentation.
Okay.
Only in finance, like not actually in like a games thing, but in the Activision UK offices, like coming off the back of this presentation and everything. And obviously, like, they had Skylanders as like a launch game, so like people in the office like knew this was coming for way longer than I did. And there was absolutely no excitement for it at all. Like, every single person in the Activision office thought this thing was going to crash and burn.
Wow.
Like, I was the only person there who was like, I think this might actually work. And a lot of people were calling it like the Vita 2.
Oh boy,
and stuff like this. Like, so it strikes me that EA probably had a very similar mindset at this point.
Absolutely,
I ended up buying the FIFA that they released on Switch.
Oh,
like,
interesting.
originally.
Okay, yeah.
And like, it's a good attempt, and there's a load of interviews with because it's a different development team. There's a load of interviews with them with like, we can't do Frostbite on Switch, which they have done in the last couple of years, but at the time it was considered like not doable. And he was like, but we've done this, we're making our own thing, and like hopefully we'll get a chance to like expand upon that in future ones, and then just never did.
No,
they never made a different game. Like
right.
they released the same game over and over again with different kits, and it's like, oh okay, never really gave it a chance beyond that.
I can't remember what website it was, but there was a website that basically just put their same review out of FIFA again because they were they haven't fucking tried, so I'm not going to fucking try either, which I thought was very funny. And definitely spoke to the lack of support that EA really did give to the system. And I don't know, maybe things will change this time, and now that everyone has seen how much of a success it actually ended up being, and we'll maybe get some more dedicated stuff from these Western publishers, but who could say? So anyway, that kind of ends Koizumi's set of the presentation. Then we get a bit of a mini montage trailer kind of wrapping up all the stuff that they've already talked about. And we get Kimishima coming back on stage, and he's like, great, here we go. There's going to be a lot of new game concepts. We're going to have new forms of entertainment, which I guess in some senses prelude weird ideas like Labo and Ring Fit Adventure. Obviously, Nintendo still doing weird stuff on the Switch. And then talks about the SKUs that are going to come out. So what's in the box? We go through you get a dock and you get an HDMI cable and you get this and that. And they talk about the Pro Controller being sold separately, and you got the two versions, the grey version and the neon version. Which version did you have at launch, Matt?
Oh, I had the grey, but that's not what I ordered.
Oh, really? Okay.
I ordered from the official Nintendo store, the neon one, and it didn't. Basically, I never got a dispatch email from them.
Oh,
and
no.
I'd taken the day off on launch day to like play the Switch, and I called them in the morning. So I'm like, I've still not got a dispatch email. And they're like, oh yeah, that won't be with you for like 3 days. So I'm like at home in the morning, like having literally taken a day off work for it. I'm like, well, fine. So I had to look on like every Argos like near me to see if anyone had any in stock, and the grey ones were the only ones that were still in stock. So I had to go out and pick that up from Argos, and while I was out doing that, my Breath of the Wild delivery arrived and got sent back to Royal Mail because I wasn't home because I was picking up the Switch.
Oh my god!
So I got home, had the note from Royal Mail, and then I had to go to a different Argos to pick up Breath of the Wild.
Oh my god, what a disaster. Holy shit, that's crazy. No, these days I'm like, people don't have interesting launch stories anymore because you just order it and it comes to your house, but that's a hell of a fucking odyssey you went on to acquire everything.
It was about as unlucky as you could get, yeah.
Yeah, wow, man. Yeah, I was boring. I just sat there and Breath of the Wild came, and then I waited 3 more hours and my Switch came, and that was about it. So, definitely less exciting. But I had the grey. I went with the grey deliberately. Me and Bally always have to go with different things. So he got the neon, so I ended up getting the grey. It's like if he gets Pokemon, gold, I have to get silver or whatever. That's just the way it is. So, but I was fine with the grey. I didn't want anything flashy. Obviously, as everybody we had issues with Joy-Con drift, and so I had to swap them out and get new ones, and then again I had to swap them out and get new ones again. So I think I'm on my third, maybe fourth. Actually, I'm technically on my fourth because I bought the OLED, which came with the Zelda Joy-Cons. Yeah. So I think I'm maybe on my maybe it's my third actually overall, but
I think I've got 5 pairs, but I only had problems with drift on one left controller, and I got that sent back to Nintendo, and they repaired it for free.
That's pretty good.
So I've been pretty lucky with that. But yeah, I did go for a brief thing where I was like, oh, I do like those Skyward Sword Joy-Cons, and like, oh, I do like those Zelda OLED ones, and so I've got quite a few of those now.
Right, yeah. The different colored ones that I got were the deep purple and the orange, and I can't remember what game that was for.
Was that Splatoon 2?
It might have been Splatoon 2. Yeah, the Splatoon 1, Splatoon 2 actually. Bally got the Splatoon 2 ones from Japan, and those were the neon green and neon pink,
you are right.
I think. But the deep purple and the dark orange were a different. Maybe it wasn't associated with the game. Maybe it was just here's new color. But those are cool colors. So I have those on my old Switch, and my current one I have the Zelda OLED, which obviously has its own Joy-Cons on it. So yeah. So we then had some messages from Nintendo of Europe. This is back when Shibata still existed. So Shibata said, "Hey, everyone in Europe, thanks for getting up so early." Because it was stupid early for us. And then he talks about European hands-on events, and then we cut to Reggie, and Reggie's like, "You can play it in 6 different states, and come and play the Switch with us." And Miyamoto's off screen in the background. He's playing Breath of the Wild. It's a little bit blurred out. And then he talks to Miyamoto, and he's like, "Surely you know when it's coming out?" And he's like, "I don't know, but maybe Mr. Onuma does." And Onuma pops out from behind the screen, and he's like, "It's me." And they're like, "Surely you know when it's coming out." I was like, "I have no idea. Maybe you have to ask Kimishima." And then Reggie's like, "Back to the studio where you're going to tell us when it's coming out." And so, then we get Kimishima wrapping up the final details before throwing to the final trailer, Game 8, or I guess Game 9, because I missed Octopath Traveler, Breath of the Wild. And I wrote here, it's the greatest fucking trailer you've ever seen in your life. And that's it, and it ends.
There's never been a better trailer. There never will be a better trailer.
No.
The trailer is better than the game that came out, and the game that came out is one of the best games that's ever been made. And somehow, every time I watch that trailer, I'm like, oh, there's a better version of this in my imagination than there was when it came out, and it's still my potentially my favorite game. Amazing. I've watched this trailer so many times now that like I know the musical beats.
Yes.
Like I can hum along with it. It's just genuinely incredible. Like
it still like stirs me every time I watch it. Like you get to that moment where it transitions to the main Zelda theme, and it's just like the ride it takes. Like I just start like shaking inside. It's just like something about it is so beautifully done. It's it's
and like the Zelda crying sort of bit, and then that like in silence, right? They cut the music entirely. It's just her crying, and then it kicks into the Zelda theme. And you're like. And a Goron turns up, and it's just like, this is wicked. Like, this is the best thing ever.
Absolutely. So I think like that was the high to end on, really, because I think it was interesting as a presentation. I'll say. I think there's some cool stuff in there. It definitely was a lot of understanding for the audience of like, this is what it is, here's what we're gonna do, and like definitely light in terms of content from like the lack of a really good Xenoblade trailer or Fire Emblem trailer, and same thing with some of these other ones, like companies coming out and saying they're working on the system but not actually having anything substantial. Like you can feel the hesitation almost from the games industry around this product, about what's going to come out and how well it's going to do, while still getting some big things.
A lot of low risk games, right, announced. Like everything that's sort of shown off on it is very, very low risk from the publishers that are making it, with the exception of Nintendo. Also, we can't skip over the fact that Breath of the Wild trailer then revealed that it was going to be a launch game for the Switch. Of
course, yes. So it ends with March 3rd, which is the release date of the Switch, which definitely puts the seal on it of like, right, well, that's what I'm playing day one on this system, which is nice. But yeah, that was it. I mean, overall, how did you feel about it? Revisiting it this time versus your original reaction back in the day?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting watching them seemingly tackle so many of the issues that they had done before. Like I said earlier, like even the aspect of like over explaining the, you know, like here's how it works, here's the controls, here's the specifics, here's what you get in the box. That almost felt like a response to the whole Wii U confusion when that was first announced, and people were like, is it a tablet for the Wii? Is it a new console? And this being like, here's exactly what you're going to get in the box. Here's what you need. There is a Pro Controller. It does not come with the system. This is separate. Like, it's so in-depth and detailed that it does feel like it is directly countering like the issues they had with Wii U and how they marketed that. And everything in here feels like a reaction to criticism they had. And it's interesting watching how much they had to explain the concept of the Switch, because it was such a brand new concept, the docking and the switching, and like now it's so normalized to us that, you know, the Switch 2 presentation, we'll get into that more, but it's just not going to have to do this. They're not going to have to explain stuff nearly as much because we know the concept already. Right.
Yeah. It's very, very, obvious at this point. I think I remember my feeling at the time, and it was definitely one of disappointment. It was one of like frustration and like, oh, for fuck's sake, Nintendo, you had like this opportunity and you kind of wasted it. And you go back and you can watch that original episode where we did it live. We streamed it live, and it was me and Bally at like 5 a.m. or whatever it was, right after the presentation, and we just give our raw reaction, our raw thoughts. And I didn't get the time to go back and watch that today, but I do remember like a dejection about it, and that was kind of felt throughout a lot of my kind of, the people I listened to online and the circles that I followed, and I think there was oh, well, maybe Nintendo are done for, like a little bit of depression. But there was still that kind of like silver lining of like, well, we're getting a new 3D Mario, we're getting, this Zelda game and all that stuff, and that's going to be great, and it's going to be really, really good. There was no Mario Kart, I noticed, in this. Like, they didn't talk about Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or anything as part of this presentation.
I think it got showed off briefly a couple of times, just like when they were demonstrating
part of the hardware stuff.
Yeah. But yeah. The big thing about this that I really remember is that, like, obviously you come off the back of this, right, and this presentation gives you what you think is like going to be everything you're going to get for the Switch for a while.
Yes.
But so we're watching this in Europe at like 4:00 in the morning, and then at 9:00 the next day, basically games journalists from all across the UK start filtering into a Switch hands-on event.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I think that was sort of almost the major. I think the presentation didn't win a lot of people over, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the big success they had with it, from a PR point of view, was then getting people hands on with it as soon as they humanly could, following the presentation. And I remember stuff coming out of those hands on events, and people, there was no embargo. People were writing about it like as soon as they left. So you're getting these really raw thoughts, and then like some previews for games like in the days later. And I remember just very slowly over the next couple of days, like people getting more and more excited and being like, you know what, like it's a really nice feeling bit of hardware. It feels very different to the Wii U, and like even like the docking system, the switching system. I think people weren't sure exactly how it worked, like whether the dock was doing some of the work for it, whether it was switching over to the dock, and like people coming away from it being like, no, you pull it out of the dock and it's immediately in your hands, and you put it down at the dock, and it maybe takes a couple seconds to connect to TV, and just like slowly over the next like week or so of all these hands-on previews coming out, and people being like, it works, it's good, it's the most powerful handheld I've ever seen. I remember vividly reading all of Chris Scullion's preview stuff on his personal website at the time, Tired Old Hack. And him like being quite positive about the whole thing, and yeah, I thought it was the presentation didn't do all the work it needed to, but then Nintendo went into marketing and PR overdrive over the next like week or so, and yeah, I remember the excitement really starting to build.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's also stuff like snipper clips, I think, playable at that event. Things that Nintendo hadn't really talked about, of like, oh, here are these smaller games that are going to be available at launch that were a bit different and quite interesting as well. So there was definitely other things that they hadn't really mentioned that showed up at those events playable also.
I was going to say, the big one for me was it was shown off in like a second sizzle reel right at the end of the Switch presentation. But it was announced on its own press release, I think, by the company, which was Minecraft Switch Edition.
Oh, right, yes.
And I remember seeing that and being like, you should have chucked that in the presentation. Like, that was like in the height of like Minecraft mania, where like you were buying a games console for a kid, you weren't going to buy one without Minecraft. And like the Wii U had only gotten it about a year before this presentation.
Right, yeah.
And like so late into the life of the Wii U. And so for them at the Switch like announcement here to be like, yeah, we're going to get Minecraft, it's coming, along with like some really odd other ones as well, like Puyo Puyo Tetris, Rayman, Skylanders from Activision was one, Sonic Mania was like a really interesting little one.
Interesting. Okay.
And considering how like a lot of indies and smaller games, like it wasn't ever certain they would come to Wii U, right? And
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Switch
it was always late otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. So like all this stuff being announced for it. Binding of Isaac was announced for it. Not at the presentation, but in a press release, like in the hours after the presentation. And if that felt like one of those things where like, yeah, do you remember all that nonsense about trying to get it on 3DS and not being able to and stuff like that? Oh, it's coming to Switch.
Oh my goodness, yeah, all the kind of the stuff with it and its issues. And I mean, like, you're even going further back than that with Super Meat Boy on the Wii and like the whole size limit situation with that game, you know. So there's a long history with Edmund McMillan games and Nintendo and not getting on the system. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think that was overall just like a presentation that, going back to it, I think I enjoyed watching it more, obviously, than at the time, because at the time, like, a lot of emotions tied up with it, and like, oh god, we want Nintendo to do this, and they didn't. But yeah, I mean, the way that it all worked out, right? 2017, just like an all-timer year in terms of releases. And,
incredible.
You know, there were things they didn't have here, like Mario plus Rabbids, which ended up being a big game for that year. And like, you look back at like all the Nintendo games that were released that year, and what everyone thought of them, and yeah, it was pretty much a killer lineup. So, and to be fair, a lot of that stuff was here in this presentation. It was just like, I think how we felt about it at the time was just slightly different.
I think as long-suffering Nintendo fans, there was that feeling that like, they're making the same mistakes again, and they didn't. They just didn't.
yeah, they actually made some good choices. But will they do it again, man? That's the question. Nintendo Switch 2. We are on the verge of the presentation. So we have you've already had the the reveal trailer, the hardware reveal trailer. We saw some kind of maybe looks like some mouse stuff going on there. Who knows? How do you think they're going to position this Direct? Because obviously they've announced it is a Nintendo Direct. It's not a live show, so it's not the same situation. First question, what percentage of this presentation is dedicated to hardware stuff versus let's just talk about the video games?
I think it could be a similar percentage to the Switch 1 presentation.
Okay.
But the weird thing here, right, is the Switch was a completely new proposition. Like, entirely new. So it was explaining every detail of it. This is how the Joy-Cons connect. They go into a grip, so you don't need to buy another controller. All of that stuff. We know all of that. The Switch 2 proposition is one that Nintendo hasn't had to deal with in a very long time, which is mostly, hey, the thing you like but more powerful. So the question there is do they do the PS5 and Xbox thing that they've been doing in recent years of being like, we're going to talk about specs in like a strong way? Will they come out and talk about, you know, it's all but confirmed, right, that it's going to have some sort of NVIDIA DLSS upscaling
yes.
baked in.
Mm-hmm.
Do they come out and talk about that? It's very un-Nintendo from previous things.
Do they do a Digital Foundry split screen of Breath of the Wild? And like, here's what it looked like here, and now it looks like this, yeah.
It feels like if they're going to talk about the hardware, they sort of have to, because they can't take more than like 30 seconds to be like, hey, it attaches with magnets now. And like the mouse thing, again, like if you look at the HD Rumble bits or the IR sensor bits from that presentation, that's like the equivalent of the mouse thing, right? Like, hey, here's what you can do, and they'll show that off, and then we'll almost certainly be shown like the first game that takes advantage of that. Like, is it something we expect, like Mario Maker 3? Being like, hey, this is basically the ideal way to play it with mouse controls. Is it going to be something really fucking weird, like a brand new IP that started out as something like a Splatoon, where it's like we had an idea with a mouse and we ended up making the mouse we gave it eyes and now it's a person? Or
sure, yeah, of course, yeah.
Do they do Mario Paint Switch 2 or something like?
Oh god,
but I think,
that'd be great.
But beyond that, like, they can't do that much talking about hardware unless they do that thing of being like, hey, yeah, here's Breath of the Wild. The question is like, are they going to do software stuff? Are they going to say like, hey, if you have Breath of the Wild on Switch and you put it on Switch 2, we're releasing an update that will make it run at 60 FPS on Switch 2. If that stuff is happening, then they've got to talk about specs, right? Not maybe directly, but they can be like, here's Breath of the Wild running at this. Here's, I don't know, Age of Calamity running on Switch 2 with the Switch 2 update. Will they have anything like Xbox does, like where you can just like press a button and the Switch 2 automatically like updates its frame rate? Will games need updates from the developers? Like, those are the unanswered questions that I think I'd expect any other console maker to answer.
Yeah, and I think those are also the kinds of questions that Nintendo traditionally don't really care about and don't really think are interesting to answer. So if that's the case, and if those are the only hardware things that they have to talk about, I think it'll be a little underwhelming from that perspective. Now, my crackpot theory, Matt, is that we don't know shit, you know? My crackpot theory is Nintendo, they've got another shoe to drop on this thing, and there's something about this system they're not talking about. I feel it in my gut that, like, things are too obvious right now. Things are too safe. And I feel like, yes, this company is different from the company that put out Switch, you know? everything has changed quite significantly, and Furukawa seems like a different CEO than Iwata was. However, I just think there's something about the DNA of Nintendo that makes them have to do something stupid. And I don't know what it is yet, but I feel like there is another shoe to drop on what the Switch 2 can do and what its hardware capability is that they just haven't talked about yet, and they're saving it for this. Now, is it something to do with that, supposed C button, supposed whatever the hell that ends up being? Is it something else that is just not obvious to us at this point in time? I don't know. But I'm staking my life that there is something else. But mainly because I can't live in a world where Nintendo just does a boring sequel to a console. I feel like I need them. I need them to do something out there, and yeah, I really hope they do, because I think then that justifies them spending 20 minutes on hardware, because then they do have to talk about a weird thing, and then we're like, what? How are you going to use this? And then like, well, don't worry, we've made an entire game just to talk about it. I do like your idea about a game for the mouse where you just play as a mouse. I think that is very funny, and I think that they would do that. They would do like a small little game where it's like, maybe it's a tech demo that's built in with the system of like, here's the mouse stealth game, and you have to use the mouse to like, jet across places and hide from creatures, and I don't know. I think there's some fun things they could really do.
The mouse is an actual mouse, and you're hiding from like an evil cat or something,
exactly.
And you have to collect cheese. That type of like thing where Nintendo is like a prototype that they go, this is alright actually, let's turn it into a very polished game with like a series of like puzzle levels for that, or something along those lines, right?
I think so, and I think that'd be great.
Do you think the gimmick could be something to do with that top USB-C slot? Do you think there could be a series of attachments there? There's a solar panelled attachment for a new Kojima...
For Boktai too.
Yeah.
I know on that episode I was like, hey, I'm just gonna... What if we just put an extra screen on it and it's a DS, I do think they're going to do something with attachments. I'm not sure what, but I feel like that just makes it an easier proposition, just like popping something on the top of it. I don't know if that is the gimmick. I feel like a Nintendo like weird thing has to be really out there, and I can't. The thing is, I can't conceptualize it. They need to do it, right? Like it's the thing that you don't think of that they do that really like takes you and surprises you. And the mouse is one thing, but it is still a traditional way of interfacing with a game. And Nintendo like non-traditional ways of interfacing with games. And I don't know what it would be, but I do think it has to be something along those lines,
Question for you though.
Yeah.
If you had no idea about the mouse thing, if it never leaked, and they didn't really hint at it in that previous trailer, and they showed it off in this presentation, would that not have given you that type of feeling? If you were going in, because you never would have guessed the mouse compatibility, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I think it might have done. Yeah, I think it might have done. So you're right. That could be it.
Yeah, and it depends how they use it as well, right? Because I think I've heard a lot of podcasts. I'm not going to name any names. I'm not slagging people off here, but I have heard a lot of podcasts be like, oh yeah, they're doing the mouse stuff. How do you think it's going to be used? And people are like, well, they'll port, I don't know, like a first-person shooter to it, and you'll have mouse controls for that, and they can bring in like an RTS. And I'm like, Nintendo's not going to do that. Like, no. Nintendo is going to make it so that the new Mario Kart game can be played by moving the mouse around on a carpet, and you tilt the mouse to tilt the cart, and you like pull the mouse back like like the remote control cars that go faster.
Yeah.
And you have to do that to make it boost, and it's going to be something like, it's going to be completely weird uses of. It's not going to be used like a mouse. Is my thought. There will be some stuff, but they will use mouse technology to make a game that controls completely differently to anything else. That's where I think that's going to go. And I think if they don't, I'm not expecting to be surprised by hardware anymore. But if there's not a piece of software that controls really fucking strangely, like if they do bring out Command and Conquer Mario Wars, basically,
sure,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I mean, I'd love it, but I'd be a bit like, oh, you're just using it as a mouse. It's
very expected. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. I think you're absolutely spot on with that. I think that Nintendo are going to take this technology and do something that nobody else has ever done with it before. And I know that's a bold thing to say because mouses have existed since like the beginning of computers, but Nintendo will do something that nobody has ever done before with a mouse. I guarantee you. I do feel like it's going to be a part of whatever kind of like major IP they have. Like, if it is a new 3D Mario, I do think the mouse will have some kind of level of interactivity with that game, whatever it ends up being. But I also do think that they will build an entire game based around it, just to justify it in the first place. Because, all of Nintendo's hardware gimmicks, at the end of the day, they build them to justify games that they're making for it, right? Like, I think that there's a level to which they look at this and they're like, okay, but what kind of game are we building this around? Or, did the idea spawn from a game idea in the first place, right? And that's what they decided to do with it. And inevitably, yes, people will end up not using it, like with many other Nintendo hardware gimmicks, but there will be a core group of games at launch that have dedicated use of it and will be weird and interesting, and we'll like follow along with it and be like, okay, yeah, let's try this out. This seems like a unique idea. So.
And importantly now, right, Nintendo knows that they can do that, and they can supplement that with Metroid Prime 4 and other hardcore games that do have traditional controls, and they know now that you don't just go all in on the gimmick. They didn't do it with Switch. Breath of the Wild was it had motion controls, a little bit like a bit of gyro, but it was a traditional game, and it meant that when you had that and 1-2 Switch at launch, you had both sides of the spectrum. And Mario plus Rabbids, completely like traditional strategy game for all things concerned, and then you've also got Mario Odyssey, a very traditional 3D Mario game, but that also had weird Joy-Con motion exclusive moves that you couldn't do if you're playing with a Pro Controller or a handheld. Like, they've got the balance so much better these days. The Switch would have been a far less interesting console if it hadn't had the IR sensor with like Labo and with Ring Fit. And
correct, yeah.
I hope that they've not taken the wrong lessons from the Switch, because I'd much rather they do something weird, do that for 2 to 3 years, and then sort of lose interest by the end. The same way they did with 3D, like, here's some really cool 3D stuff for 3 or so years, then we're just going to drop the 3D for the consoles, for the 2DS, and then we'll just put out some good 3DS games, like, by themselves that don't worry about the 3D.
Right.
But the day that they don't think to do something interesting at launch, at least, is going to be a very sad day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we'll be disappointed. I think we will see that kind of that spark, that weird Nintendo. So fingers crossed. I think it'll be good. Okay, so another question. They had 9 games here shown in this presentation. Most of them first party, some third party stuff in there. Are we going to get over or under 9 games revealed during this Switch 2 Direct?
Over. I way over, I think. I think potentially a lot of it will be sizzle reel at the end.
Okay.
But I think every publisher out there is going to want to get a game shown off during this. And Nintendo is in a position where they can say no, because they don't need to show that they have that third-party support as much anymore. So I think we get a ton of first-party stuff from them. And it feels like they've been holding a lot of first-party stuff, like looking at the last couple of years of Switch, right?
Yes,
and then I think we're going to get a load of big third-party games. I think we're going to get a ton of ports from the PS4 and the PS5.
Right.
And I wonder if a lot of them get shown here. Like Monster Hunter Wilds feels like a real potential one, right? Like,
it feels like a potential one. I mean, the state that it runs on modern hardware is leaves a lot to be desired. But I don't know. Maybe they can figure out a way to do it on Switch. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, like Elden Ring. Like, there feels like From Software feels like one they could really bring in here that was not there for for the launch of the Switch, right? Where they can go, yeah, we're going to do Elden Ring.
Feels like this era is kind of Bethesda in a way, right? Where there's like, here's the significant company we've not worked with before. Well, technically you have, because Dark Souls Remastered was on Switch, but like not in a significant way.
And that was a port of like the PS3 version, when like the PS4 version was like an actual remaster. But like, it feels now they can be like, here's Elden Ring, here's Dark Souls 3, here's like over the next like few years you can just get like Sekiro. Like, there's a ton of stuff that From Software should just be able to put on this now, and that's the same for a ton of publishers. Like, do we get a load of Assassin's Creed games on Switch 2? Like, does Ubisoft turn up and they go, hey, Shadows is coming to... That's I feel like if Nintendo wants it, that's the sort of stuff that could really see the software numbers like pumped up for Switch 2 at this presentation.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. I think the real question is how many companies have actually had access to hardware in time for this, right? Because Nintendo are infamously secret about this stuff, and they've not been sharing a lot of details with a lot of companies. So it's probably only going to be the bigger third parties, I would imagine, that get anything shown here. I think any chance of smaller games is going to be very, very slight, right? Like any indie developers out there, like unless you're directly working with Nintendo, like was the case with Snipperclips and with SFB games, I believe. So that stuff is, I hope, shows up some of it, but like I don't foresee a lot of an indie focus here. I think it is going to be like the big third parties who have had access to it. I think Ubisoft will probably show up big, right? I think that's probably an obvious thing to say because Ubisoft always show up big for every Nintendo system. And obviously they're in some dire straits right now, and they need some big wins. And some easy wins are launch titles for a new Nintendo console. So I imagine they'll have quite a few things in their lineup that are ready to go. I don't know. Do we see... Yeah, Capcom, definitely a big supporter, and a lot of big games this generation that didn't come to Switch, like the Resident Evil games, and even, you know, you could put Devil May Cry 5 on there. There's lots of stuff you could bring over from Capcom.
Dead Rising, the Dead Rising remake. What was the Kunitsugami even would be like a really interesting one to see on it.
For sure. Fits the audience as well. They could even announce Okami 2 coming to Switch 2 as well, you know?
And like Konami potentially, do they show the Metal Gear Solid stuff? Like Silent Hill 2 maybe once their PS5 exclusives done? Like there feels like a lot of like, and like maybe like a load more Yakuza games as well.
Right,
Sega,
yeah, absolutely.
In terms of those big like Japanese companies,
Sega, Capcom, maybe Konami. I think those definitely make some sense from the Japanese perspective. Western publishers, who knows? I wonder if Microsoft will have any presence with stuff there as well, because they are increasingly a big presence as a third-party publisher.
That feels like a good shout.
You know, there's, could we get Indiana Jones because it's coming to PS5? Could we get, Starfield, right?
Yeah.
Avowed, yeah. Any of these coming would be. I mean, the obvious one is Hi-Fi Rush, right? That has not come out. Again, I don't know if Microsoft has IP ownership for the first game to re-release it, or if that's with Crofton now that that's been completed. But I think that there was a rumor of Hi-Fi Rush coming to Switch at one point, and then it never ended up happening. So I think that's an obvious one from their side in any case. And Sony, I don't know. I feel like Sony... they probably are not going to do anything Switch related until they have to pull like the emergency trigger that like PC and PlayStation isn't enough anymore because budgets are getting even bigger. But who knows, that might end up happening at some point. But yeah, in terms of presence there, I think those all make a lot of sense. I mean, my other question is people. Like, do we have the same presence that we did here in terms of representation across Nintendo and across studios of like different people coming out and talking about the games? Do we have any talking heads at all, or is it just voiceover? What do you think from a presentation standpoint?
I'm trying to think who's been I can't remember the guy's name who turns up in a lot of the directs recently. The guy who turned up and was like, hey, Metroid Prime 4 has been delayed, but here's Metroid Dread.
That is Shinya Takahashi. So he is head of EPD. He's basically in charge of all of Nintendo software, essentially, and all their IP. So he's the bowl cut guy with the glasses.
He's the guy I'd most expect to see turn up, I think. Like, he's been sort of like the quiet face of Nintendo for a little bit now. Like, him and Koizumi. But I feel... Maybe my memory's failing me here, but I feel like Koizumi's turned up less and less recently.
You're correct. Yeah, Koizumi has not been very present in recent Nintendo presentations. Like, it feels like the first half of the Switch's life cycle, he was super present and he was being positioned as like the new face of the company, essentially.
Yeah.
And it feels like partway through the generation, Nintendo decided, we don't want to do that anymore. Like, I feel like they decided they wanted Nintendo to be more of a faceless entity. I think part of this is reflected in like the Mario voice acting change of like everyone is Mario, you know, they don't want they don't want this like celebrity status for anyone within Nintendo or anyone representing Nintendo. They want Nintendo to be thought of as the entity, the magic house, the thing. There's no people associated with it. It's just, it is Nintendo, and it always has been Nintendo, and it always will be Nintendo. So I think that kind of like Koizumi like disappearing kind of lines up with that mentality, which to me is very disappointing, because I think that, you know, part of the success of that branding was him being front and center. I think also you've seen it with Sony. Like, I think Sony have very much fallen off with, they used to have Adam Boyes out there, used to have Shuhei Yoshida, and like there's no person representing that company anymore, and it feels a little soulless as a result, you know.
Yeah, Koizumi feels very synonymous with those early Switch days. Like the click, I don't know if any other Nintendo face did the click as well as he did. Like in the presentations, and he was really very, you know, very affable. Always did really well in those presentations. He always, like, you're like, yes, this guy's going to show me something real good. And
feels like an on-screen presence as well. Yeah, you know, has charisma.
Yeah, exactly. And I think behind the scenes, right, he sort of had a lot of stock with Nintendo fans from the stuff of being like, he was the guy pushing for story in Mario games, and like the stuff in the original Galaxy, and then the stuff in Odyssey. And I think like, yeah, his stock was like building, and obviously that's still there, but just you don't see him very much these days. No. If they're going to roll him back out, it feels like it'd be for this, especially if there's a new 3D Mario game that he's in charge of, right? That feels like the opportunity that we might get to see him if he's been squirreled away, just making a big 3D Mario title.
Yes, for sure. I even feel like Miyamoto has had more screen time in recent Nintendo Directs than Koizumi, right?
Yeah.
Like they're bringing, obviously they're bringing Miyamoto out for these other things that aren't games necessarily. But yeah, it feels like he's had presence. And Anuma as well. Like obviously with Zelda, he's been front and center. But yeah, do we get like because I imagine there's nothing to say about a new Zelda anytime soon, having just shipped one. But do we get Anuma coming out and being like, we're working on a new Zelda, we're doing new things? What do you think?
Maybe. It depends, because like you look back at previous generations, right, all the way up until the Wii U, and you'd get Zelda tech demos that weren't new Zelda games, but they were showing off the new hardware. But like for now, but so that, I was going to say, I don't think we get that anymore, because what we get is Breath of the Wild running at a higher frame rate and a higher resolution. I think that's the Zelda tech demo in quotation marks. It would just be a nicer version of Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom that we get to see. Maybe if they do that, if they go, hey, here's Breath of the Wild, here's Tears of the Kingdom running at a higher thing to show off the Switch 2, maybe then there's a little line being like, and by the way, the Legend of Zelda team is hard at work at the next entry in the Legend of Zelda series. Please stay tuned for future messaging. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd fucking love to get a Zelda announcement, like a teaser. That'd be amazing. But it's so far off my radar at the moment. Like
at least 6 years away, you know. Like,
yeah,
it's a while.
I'm feeling 3D Mario. That feels like the right time, and I don't see like big 3D Zelda. The only way that we get 3D Zelda is if Tears of the Kingdom was actually less work than we expected. And they
were lying about it the whole time.
Well, not. I guess if they had just like if building off Breath of the Wild had actually made that game, you know, makeable in a few years, right? And they had a second team or something like that working on the next one at the same time. But other than that, yeah, you're right. We're so far away from a potential launch that I can't see it being teased now.
Yeah. Yeah, especially also we had Echoes of Wisdom last year also, so we've had a lot of Zelda recently.
It feels like the thing for this year is going to be the big Zelda hardcore game, and it's not the same because it won't hit the same audience. But I feel like the big Zelda hardcore game is going to be Metroid Prime.
Yes.
4.
Is that the game they closed this presentation with? Is that the big One More Thing trailer?
I don't know if it's the big One More Thing trailer, but I think it's one of the big trailers. I think Mario might be the big One More Thing trailer because Mario Kart last time, right, was it was a port. It was a good port, but it was a known entry.
Yes.
So exactly. Mario got shown off earlier in the presentation, but I feel like Mario Kart will take the Mario Odyssey spot in this, in terms of being like, yeah, we showed you a bit of Mario Kart already, so it's not a huge surprise, but here's here's one layer of detail before we reveal the next one in June on Mario Kart, whatever. And then I feel like the ending trailer is, oh, here's a 3 Mario game you've never heard of. rather than Metroid Prime 4, which is like good for the hardcore like us, but people are still like, oh, we knew this was coming, and it's coming to the original Switch still, so like
that makes
not
sense,
a big deal.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I think there's potential. I mean, Fire Emblem apparently has been the remake of the fourth game in the series has been ready for like 6 years or whatever. So apparently, that might be a thing that could come out. Again, that could just be a Switch 1 thing that they don't even show as part of this presentation. Maybe they tease the future of the series. Maybe they have maybe have 2 Fire Emblem games ready to go. Who knows? At this point in time, it seems like everything about that series is ahead of the curve when it comes to development. And obviously, I would love a new Monolith Soft tease, and I think that team works at an astonishing pace.
I think that's doable,
they just released a definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles X, but they could do a nice little tease. I am hopeful that it's something that's not Xenoblade. I do think that it would be cool to do something different, and I'd like to see them open up to a different audience as well. So I'd be hopeful to see something from those guys. And also, I think from a visual perspective, they probably are technically the biggest wizards at Nintendo. So I think they could make something that really pushes the visuals of the hardware and makes it like look super impressive. So I think that would be a good thing to have there. But yeah, I think I'm with you in terms of more than 9 games being shown, and whether that's just most of them being third party and just a handful being Nintendo's first party, that could be the case. But I do think they want to go big here. I do think they want to make a statement and say this first year of Switch 2 is going to be as big as the first year of Switch 1, and we're going to have something every month, and it's going to be significant, and it's going to be big, and whether it's third-party exclusives as well, right? We haven't really talked about that, but there's potential for a third party to come and make a game exclusively for Switch 2. And I don't know who that would be, right? Is it Ubisoft again, because they have such a track record of it? I don't know. Is it them partnering with a Japanese studio?
Yeah, does Nintendo... Yeah, does Nintendo get a bit more free with its IP, maybe? Like, we had Ubisoft work on Mario Plus Rabbids, we had them do Star Fox stuff for...
in Starlink,
Toys to Life game, Starlink, and... do we see Nintendo, handing out a couple more of their things? Also, I guess the big question here, do we see Donkey Kong? Because there's been something rumoured for ages, right?
Yeah. There's multiple Donkey Kong rumors. I think there's 3D Donkey Kong, there's 2D Donkey Kong, there's, he could just get any kind of like appearance in whatever game, but I feel like there's something there. I do think 3D Mario is what EPD Tokyo has been working on. I do think that's their game, but is there a Donkey Kong component to it? Is it a Mario and Donkey Kong game? Like is that what's happening, right? That could very well be the case. So I can see that being a possibility. Not many people talk about Splatoon 4. I mentioned it in our predictions episode. I think that's a likely thing as well.
Yeah, makes
if you
sense.
Want to replicate Switch 1, getting another online game early in the life cycle is logical. And again, that seems like a very iterative series from them. Animal Crossing, I think, is too early, personally. I think that's going to come a little bit later. But yeah, there's so much they can do. There's a huge amount of possibility here, and it's very, very exciting. And we won't have to wait long. So.
No, it's really soon now. If you had one like Nintendo game or franchise or like concept that you could see it, that you could like will into existence at this presentation, like is there one that you'd absolutely love to see beyond what we're expecting?
It's a great question. I mean, I would love for them to bring back an old franchise in a new way, like they did with Kid Icarus on 3DS, right? Like, go back to the NES era and find something fucking weird and do something new with it. I think Takamaru's Ninja Castle from Nintendo Land has always been my go-to of like, it's a ninja man, like he's got a fucking sword, he can throw shurikens, like there's something there with that IP that you have just not touched in 3 decades or 4 decades. Go back to that, like have a new IP built essentially off the bones of that old IP, which I think something they're very good at doing. It's like, okay, we had this thing that existed, we can basically make a new thing, but let's just call it that, so we have that historical Nintendo tie back to it. I'd love to see some kind of weird action game that has something to do with that IP, because I think that would be really, really cool. That's probably my pick. What about you?
No, I'm fully with you there, because I know you said a lot about like Nintendo can often be like late to genres, But then they'll come in and do their own thing. Like Vampire Survivors is one that you've chucked out before as being like,
yeah, of course.
Where's Nintendo's like Kirby style Vampire Survivors game or something?
Yeah.
And I still am really waiting for them to do something a bit Dark Soulsy. Not intent doesn't have to be like difficult, more like like how Jedi Survivor did like Sekiro.
Just like methodical combat, basically.
Yeah, it feels like they could do something like that, and like they're so good at level design, which I know is like a really basic thing to say, but Nintendo does great level design.
Yeah,
and many of these like Soul games are based on like excellent level design and like exploration and like cool places.
Yes.
And they do that. Zelda is obviously like one side of that, but I feel like they could do a really good, fairly linear combat heavy game that's not that has difficulty options. It isn't Dark Souls, it isn't that sort of thing, but is that, and like the game that you mentioned, the Ninja Castle one, feels like again like a franchise they could really do with that. And like
for sure,
Kid Icarus was its own complete like weird genre when it came out, but yeah, I'd love to see them do that, because I'd love to see like the proper Nintendo craft behind that kind of thing. Like or potentially the other way around, right? Like we talked about From Software earlier. Like if From Software maybe took like a Nintendo IP and like ran with it. If you're playing as like a Chozo warrior or something.
Oh my god, could you imagine? Oh no, now I need this. Now I need the Metroid Dark Souls game. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that sounds sick.
Yeah, collecting like energy swords and things like that, and like getting into that methodical combat while you're exploring like a weird, like a really like dark 3D version of Zebes. Like something like that would be very, very cool.
Yeah, tonally it works so well. Like it's it's Nintendo's more kind of like dark IP from like a tonal perspective. I think like a melee focused game where you play as a Chozo in a Souls kind of like fashion would be it sounds amazing. That sounds exactly like what I want. So yeah, fingers crossed that they take that idea. Please do. But yeah, I don't know. I think I already mentioned it, but like I want to see whatever Monolith Soft does next. They are pretty much my favorite Nintendo studio, I think. So I'm very curious about what they're going to end up doing, because it feels like their star has just risen and risen over the last decade or so, and I feel like their games deserve to be played by more people, so I hope they go out there and do something a bit more universal. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I think that just about covers it. Like, any other thoughts that we haven't kind of touched on for what could potentially be there and the structure of this thing? Okay, maybe one last question. What are the colors going to be? What SKUs are they going to announce for this thing at the end?
Oh, they've shown off a little bit of color, right? Where they've got that like
the strip
again, pastel pink and pastel blue again, right? But reversed slightly. So rather than
it's fully black on the outside, essentially. Yeah,
and then you've got the pastel like grips as well for the Joy-Cons, like the ones that you attach on for the mouse. So I wouldn't be surprised if they stick with that. To be honest, I don't know if they'll go.
I think they'll just do one.
Yeah, because the weird thing that I found is the controllers are the same color as the console, right? Which wasn't even the case for the grey Joy-Con. The grey Joy-Con is still like a slightly different color to the black Switch.
Right.
So it feels like they're going for like a different vibe with this one. I'd like to see more. I really would, but like I think they might just stick with it. Maybe black and white. Maybe they have an all white console with white Joy-Cons and the white console as well.
I could see that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right in the fact that they're not calling out color as obviously. It's an accented thing at this point, right? And it's the only color that exists visibly when you've attached the controllers, I think, is under the analog sticks, right? Where you have the slight color there, but otherwise color isn't really visible. So yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense, because like, okay, you could have different colors, but then the only thing you see when you have it attached together is the slight accent of the color on the analog stick. So yeah, you could be onto something with the black and white. The color remains the same on the inside, but the base color of the system is changed. Yeah, that could make some sense. But knowing Nintendo, they'll save the white version for the OLED when they do that 2 years time. So
I forgot about that. That's gonna suck. I love my OLED Switch so much. Yeah, going to the non-OLED screen is going to really not be good.
Yeah, honestly, it is the purchase I have least regretted in a long time. Because when I first got it, I was like, oh, we're so close to Switch 2. Didn't know we were at least 2 years away. So I was like, well, this has served me very well. Playing Bayonetta Origins on the plane on an OLED. Oh, beautiful. It's so good looking. So, yeah, it's going to be a real shame to step down, especially because I have a Steam Deck OLED as well. So my entire handheld life is OLED. So yeah, it's going to be a rude awakening, I think, when the Switch 2 comes. But hopefully they'll compensate for it with some very nice visuals. So
yes, yeah.
Good. Great. Well, I think that's everything we have to say on the Switch 2 presentation. I'm very interested. I'm super curious about, what the shape of this thing will be. I feel like as Nintendo fans, we're not just interested in the content of what there's going to be there, but how they're going to deliver it to us, right? Like, What is the format? What is their kind of like stance going to be? How are they going to message this thing? Very, very interested in finding out all that stuff. And yeah, the dock as well. I wonder if there'll be anything else on the dock. Is it going to have any significant change? Like, is it going to be power in the dock this time? There's lots of stuff there that they could discuss. But I think we'll leave that till next week. Which it's strange saying that, but next week we'll know what this system is, and all of our thoughts and predictions will be proved wrong as always. Yeah, thanks so much, Matt, for joining me for this episode. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. I really liked being here. I'm going to ask this on behalf of the rest of the audience. Will we get a Switch 2 reaction from you and Bally?
That is planned at the moment, as long as time permits, as long as Bally Chew and Bally Jr. don't make a fuss, then hopefully we'll be able to sit down and do an emergency episode. Be hopefully... something we can do pretty immediately after that presentation. I have blocked out my calendar at work, so I am watching it live, and there's nothing will stop this train, all right? Nobody's going to pull me into a random meeting. I'm not letting anybody do that, so hopefully I will be able to watch it live, and we'll get all our reactions to you. That will be next Wednesday, I believe it is, the 2nd.
Yeah. 2 p.m. UK time, I believe.
2 p.m. UK time, yep. So much better than last time, as we mentioned multiple times. We had to wake up at 4 a.m. to watch that fucking presentation. So,
and we did.
We did. Look, you're not going to stop us, but definitely much better for our sleep schedule to see it at 2 p.m. In an afternoon. So, yeah. That'll be happening. You can obviously find us in various places across the internet. We are on Patreon, where you can support us, patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, and get bonus episodes and other fun things. And we'd like to thank our $10 plus patrons. They are Zach S., Thomas, Matthew, Albert, Wicked Gamer UK Alan, Turtle, Orange Thunder, and Ali T. Of course, thanks everybody for their support. You can go over there, get bonus episodes where we talk about non-Nintendo things. We just talked about Split Fiction, and we did a bit of a spoiler cast on it as well. So if you've been playing through that, go listen to that episode. That is a lot of fun. We'll have bonus bits and all that other stuff. Also, you can find us on the internet, various places, at TNL Podcast. Go follow the podcast account. You'll get updates about episodes like this one, because it's late. So there you go. You would have known that if you'd followed us over there at TNL Podcast. You can find me at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Matt?
You can find me at Matt Lorigan on Blue Sky, not on Twitter anymore.
Yep, fair enough.
I think that is it for me on the internet these days.
That's good. Yeah, keep a lean diet of social media. It's probably the best thing to do in our current times. So, very good. You can find Bally at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN 91. And you can obviously find the show in various places across the internet, Spotify, Stitch. You can download us. You can look at us online and say, hey, I want to subscribe to that. And then you'll get it in your feed. It's great. And it's all wonderful and nice, and you can review us on there, and that's even better. So please do that. That'd be mightily appreciated. And then come join the community. We're on Discord. Lots of people chatting over there. I'm sure lots of people will be watching the Switch 2 presentation on Discord as it happens. So join the community, and you can also find our YouTube channel where we put this fine show over there as well, if you want to listen to it that way instead. Of course, you can write in as well and send us some emails. ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is the email address, and we will be taking, of course, lots of emails about the Switch 2 when it happens. So do email us and send us stuff into the show, and we'll be getting back to emails most likely next time. But I think that's it. I think that's everything that I have to say here. Thanks once again, Matt, for joining us.
No problem at all.
We'll be back, hopefully next week, talking about that goddamn Nintendo Switch 2. So until then, we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The musical interlude used on today's show was the title theme from Tank Troopers, copyright Nintendo 2016.